Imagine a great mound rising from a flat river plain at dusk, a low, sprawling hill of weathered brick, standing alone in a landscape of fields and dust. Picture it. The sun is going down over the plains of the Indus, staining the sky the color of old terracotta. The river is somewhere to the east, wide and slow and silver-brown, murmuring between banks of tamarisk. The heat of the day is lifting. Doves are settling into the thorn trees. Far off, a bullock cart creaks home along a track between the fields, its driver half asleep, exactly as bullock carts have creaked across this plain every evening for 5,000 years. And in the middle of it all stands the mound. Enormous, silent, its slopes littered with fragments of brick, rounded by rain and wind into something that looks almost natural, almost like a hill. The local people have always known it was not a hill. They called it, in their own tongue, the Mound of the Dead. They grazed their goats on it, quarried its strange, hard, beautifully made bricks for their houses, and did not dig too deep. For underneath that mound, under the goat paths and the dust and the 4,000 years of silence, lies a city. Not a village, not a fort, a city. One of the largest cities of the ancient world. Streets laid out on a grid a modern engineer would recognize, running straight for hundreds of meters, crossing at right angles. Houses of baked brick, 2 stories high, built around cool courtyards with bathing rooms and covered drains. Wells lined with bricks so perfectly wedge-shaped they have not collapsed in 45 centuries. A great public bath sealed with bitumen, still watertight when archaeologists found it. Granaries, workshops, dockyards, and beneath the streets, the thing that still astonishes every engineer who sees it. A complete underground sewer system, house by house, street by street, inspected through manholes, built 1,000 years before Rome existed, and better than anything most of the world would have again until the 19th century. And here is the strangest part. The part that makes tonight's journey unlike any other we have taken together. When this city was alive, no one we know of ever wrote its name down where we can read it. No pharaoh boasted of trading with it. No later epic sang of its kings. If it even had kings, which, as we shall see, is one of the great open questions of archaeology. Its own writing. And it had writing, hundreds upon hundreds of neat, confident inscriptions. Has never been deciphered. Not one sentence, not one name, not one word read with certainty. When it died, it was forgotten so completely that history itself lost the memory. The ancient Greeks never heard of it. The great chronicles of India do not clearly remember it. For 4,000 years, the mound by the river kept its secret, and the world below went on ploughing and herding above one of the greatest achievements of the human species. Until, one day, a little over a century ago, the secret came out by accident, in the most humble way imaginable, through the ballast of a railway line. This is the Indus Valley Civilization, and it is, by any honest measure, the greatest civilization history forgot. At its height, 4,500 years ago, it was the largest civilization on the face of the earth. Its territory was bigger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia put together. Its cities held tens of thousands of people. Its merchants sailed to the ports of Sumer, where clerks wrote down the name of their far country. Meluha, in cuneiform on clay. Its craftsmen made beads so fine that queens in Ur were buried wearing them. Its weights and measures were so precisely standardized across 1,000 miles that a merchant's stone weight from one city matches a weight from another to a fraction of a gram. It flourished for 700 years. And it did all this, so far as we can tell, without great kings, without armies, without temples raised to glorified rulers, without a single certain monument to any individual human being. No pyramid, no palace, no royal tomb, no statue of a conqueror. Of all the world's first civilizations, it is the quietest, the most orderly, the most mysterious, and the most completely lost. Tonight, we will bring it back. We will watch the first farming villages take root at the foot of the Western Mountains 9,000 years ago and follow the slow gathering of skills. Wheat and barley, cattle and cotton, brick and bead. Down onto the great floodplain. We will see the cities rise, almost suddenly, in one of history's great flowerings, and walk their streets in the cool of the evening, through the gridded blocks of Mohenjo-daro, past the wells and the workshops, up to the great bath on its high citadel. We will handle the little seals with their carved unicorns and their unread signs, weigh the merchants' perfect stones, follow the ships down the coast and across the sea to Sumer. We will meet the people themselves, the potters and bead makers, the children with their terracotta toys and their dice, the dead in their quiet graves. And we will circle, slowly and honestly, the great mysteries, who governed them, what they believed, why their writing defeats us, why their cities knew so little of war. And then we will watch it end, not in fire and conquest, as the old theories imagined, but in something slower and stranger. Rivers wandering away, rains failing, cities emptying street by street, a whole world dissolving gently back into the countryside, and being forgotten, so thoroughly forgotten that its rediscovery in the 1920s forced humanity to rewrite the history of civilization itself. It is a story with no battles and no tyrants, no burning libraries and no fallen empires. A story, instead, of order, water, craft, and time. And it may be, of all the stories this fire has told, the one best shaped for the quiet end of a day. Before we set out for the river, a quiet word. If these long journeys into the deep past bring you something, some calm, some wonder, some company in the late hours, you might take a moment to leave a like and to follow along with the channel, but only if these journeys are truly yours. It is a small thing, and it helps other travelers in the night find their way to this fire. And if you feel like it, leave a word below to say where you are listening from tonight, your city, and the hour it is where you are. There is a quiet pleasure in knowing that someone far away, in another river valley of the world, is walking the same brick streets tonight. But there is nothing you must do. The only thing that matters now is the dusk settling over the plain, and the old mound waiting, and the story that is about to begin. So come and stand at the foot of the mound of the dead as the last light fades, and the first stars come out over the Indus plain, and the doves fall silent in the thorn trees. Somewhere beneath your feet, a street is waiting that has not heard footsteps in 4,000 years. But before we can walk it, we must first learn how anyone came to know it was there at all. And that story begins, of all places, with 2 British engineers, a half-built railway line, and 100 miles of track laid on the crushed bricks of a lost world. Every civilization we have visited at this fire left us a voice. Egypt left us books of the dead and love songs. Mesopotamia left libraries of clay. Even the Maya, after long silence, yielded their glyphs to decipherment and spoke. The Indus civilization is different, profoundly, hauntingly different, and honesty about that difference is the foundation of everything we will do tonight. The Indus people wrote, "We cannot read it." And so everything we know, everything, comes not from words but from things. Bricks and beads, seals and skeletons, drains and dice, the mute physical residue of human lives, interrogated by a century of archaeology with steadily improving tools. Tonight's story is built from that evidence, and it is a strange and wonderful way to know a people. We do not know the name of a single Indus person, but we know what they ate for dinner. We do not know their gods with certainty, but we know their sewer maintenance schedules. We cannot read their titles, but we can weigh their honesty on their own scales. Keep that inversion in mind all night. Other civilizations we know from the top down. Kings first, peasants last. The Indus we know from the bottom up. Dinner first, gods last, kings, perhaps, never. The rediscovery itself is one of archaeology's great comedies of error, and it begins with vandalism on an industrial scale. In the 1850s, British engineers were building a railway across the Punjab, and railways need ballast, crushed stone or brick to bed the tracks. Near a village called Harappa, beside a dry old riverbed, stood a vast mound of ancient brick, and for 100 miles of track, the contractors mined it, carting away the masonry of what would prove to be one of the 2 greatest cities of the ancient world, and crushing it under the rails. The engineer brothers who supervised the line, John and William Brunton, knew the bricks were old. A visiting archaeologist, Alexander Cunningham, poked at the diminishing mound in the 1870s, found a curious little carved seal, a bull, and some signs no one could read, and misfiled the whole site in his mind as something historically minor. The seal was the key to a lost world, lying in plain sight. No one could see it, because no one yet imagined there was a lost world to unlock. Trains still run today on the bed of Harappan brick. The ancient city, quite literally, carries the modern traffic. As neat an image of forgetting as history provides. The awakening came half a century later, in the early 1920s, and it came double. At Harappa, the archaeologist Daya Ramsani began systematic digging into what the railway had left. And 500 kilometers south, at the great untouched mound the locals called Mohenjo-daro, the Mound of the Dead, his colleague Rakal Das Banerjee, investigating a ruined Buddhist stupa of a much later age that crowned the hill, dug down past it into something no one expected. Brick streets, and more brick streets, and seals with the same unreadable signs and the same strange carved animals as the seal from Harappa, 500 kilometers away. The two excavations compared notes, the seals matched, and the director of the Archaeological Survey of India, John Marshall, understood what that matching meant. One culture, one system, spanning distances as great as the length of Egypt, and older, on every indication, than anything known in India by 1,000 years and more. In September 1924, Marshall published the announcement in the Illustrated London News, in words that archaeologists still quote with a shiver of envy. Not often has it been given to archaeologists to light upon the remains of a long-forgotten civilization. Scholars of Mesopotamia wrote in almost at once. Seals of exactly this kind, they reported, had been turning up for years in the ruins of Sumer, filed as curiosities, unexplained. The synchronism snapped into place. The unknown civilization had traded with Ur and Akkad in the 3rd millennium BC. In one publication, the known history of the Indian subcontinent grew older by 2,000 years, and the family of humanity's first civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and their siblings, gained an unsuspected member larger than any of them. It remains, a century later, the single greatest enlargement of the human past ever made by archaeology. And it began with a mound quarried for railway ballast, and a seal nobody could read, and, as the excavators soon confirmed, trench by trench, nobody still can. To understand the civilization, first stand in its landscape, because the Indus world, like Egypt's, was the gift of water, but of water with a wilder temperament, and everything distinctive about these people flows from the character of their rivers. The Indus itself is one of the Earth's great rivers. Born in the high Himalaya and Karakoram, fed by the melting of the largest ice fields outside the poles, it comes down onto the plains of what is now Pakistan, carrying not only water, but mountains. Silt in stupendous quantities, which it spreads across a floodplain hundreds of kilometers wide in a summer flood that is the whole country's calendar and fortune. East of it, in the civilization's great days, ran a second river system. The broad seasonal river the later Indian tradition would remember as the Sarasvati and geographers today call the Gagahakra. Its banks, we now know, even more thickly settled than the Indus's own. And over the whole double river world blows the true sovereign of South Asia, the monsoon. The annual migration of an ocean's worth of moisture from sea to land, arriving each summer as a green apocalypse of rain. River, silt, snowmelt, monsoon. A machine of staggering fertility and of real caprice. For the Indus, unlike the punctual Nile, is a shapeshifter. It silts its own bed, rises above its plain, and every few generations bursts its banks for good and wanders, sometimes by many kilometers, drowning what it abandons in floods and abandoning what it once watered to dust. The Egyptians could build beside their river for 3,000 years. The Indus peoples built on artificial platforms, raised their cities on massive brick foundations above the flood, and learned, as we shall see, to treat water. Welcome water, dangerous water, holy water perhaps, as the central engineering problem and perhaps the central idea of their entire culture. the land gave them everything else with the same doubled hand. Timber from the riverine forests, which teemed in those days with tiger and rhinoceros, elephant and crocodile. The seals will show us all of them, fish and waterfowl from the marshes, and above all, mud. The deep, stone-free alluvium that is both the plain's poverty, no building stone for hundreds of kilometers, and its opportunity. Mud plus straw plus fire equals brick, and the Indus peoples became the greatest brick makers of the ancient world, firing them hard as stone in kilns fed by the gallery forests, and a detail that still gives engineers a small shiver of pleasure, making them everywhere, across the whole 1,000,000 square kilometers of their world, in the same standardized proportion. 4 units long, 2 wide, 1 thick. The ratio that bonds strongest in a wall, rediscovered by modern masonry, and enforced, somehow, from the Arabian Sea to the Himalayan foothills without, so far as we know, a single king to decree it. Hold that brick a moment. The 4-2-1 brick, identical in Harappa and in cities 1,000 kilometers apart, because it is the civilization in miniature and the mystery in miniature too, a world of astonishing, voluntary-seeming uniformity, order without visible orderers, standardization without a visible state. We will meet the pattern again and again tonight, in the weights, the drains, the street grids, the script. And the brick is its humblest and perhaps its deepest expression. A civilization that agreed with itself across enormous distances about how things ought to be done, and did them that way, quietly, for 700 years. Before we watch it grow, fix the scale itself in the mind's eye, because the numbers still startle the professionals. The Indus culture zone spans roughly 1,000,000 square kilometers, against Egypt's habitable 30-odd thousand along the Nile ribbon, and Mesopotamia's core of perhaps 250,000. The quiet sister was, in sheer territory, several times both her famous siblings put together. Across it, surveys now count more than 2,000 known settlements. Population estimates for the mature age run from 1,000,000 souls to several times that. The largest single cultural population on Earth in its century, by most reckonings. And one settlement in that web, standing at the top of the mound we climbed at dusk, will hold this whole night's attention more than any other. It is time to meet the world that all this water and brick was building toward. Civilizations do not appear, they accumulate. And one of the great gifts of modern archaeology has been the discovery of just how long and deep the Indus accumulation ran. The story begins not on the river plain at all, but at its western rim, where the mountains of Baluchistan step down to meet the Indus lowlands through a bracelet of passes. And there, at the foot of the Bolan Pass, one of the immemorial doorways between the Iranian plateau and South Asia, French and Pakistani archaeologists in the 1970s uncovered a site that rewrote the prehistory of half a continent, Mehrgarh. Its lowest levels date to around 7,000 BC, 9,000 years ago, contemporary with the earliest farming towns of the Middle East, and they hold, already, the whole toolkit of the future, wheat and barley in cultivated fields. Herds of sheep, goat, and above all the humped zebu cattle, domesticated here from local wild stock. The patient, heat-proof, flood-wading ox that would become the engine, the wealth, and eventually the sacred animal of the subcontinent forever after. Mud brick houses with granaries, and, in the graves, the deep past of things we will meet all night. Beads of imported turquoise and lapis worn by farmers' wives 60 centuries before the cities. A young man buried with a polished stone axe, and a discovery that made dental history. Molars drilled with tiny, precise holes. The earliest known dentistry on Earth, performed at Mehrgarh with flint drills 8,000 years ago, presumably, one hopes, with something soothing to bite on. Century by century, the site's layers climb. Pottery arrives, then the potter's wheel, copper appears, cotton. The first cotton in the world, Mehrgarh's other world-changing domesticate, begins its career as the fibre that would one day clothe more of humanity than any other. Terracotta figurines of women, heavy-hipped and elaborate, begin their long tradition. And the village grows into a town, trading with the plateau behind and the plain below. Then, over the 5th and 4th millennia BC, the accumulated dawn flows downhill. Farming villages spread out of the mountain rim onto the floodplains. First the edges, then, as the settlers mastered the flood, the deep plain itself. And by around 3300 BC, the archaeologists' early Harappan period opens, a world of regional farming cultures across the whole vast watershed, distinct but conversing, their painted pottery styles mingling along the rivers. Towns appear, some walled against flood or feud. The first experiments in planning show up. Streets already tending to the cardinal directions, the first signs scratched on pots, potter's marks, or the seeds of the script. Long-distance trade quickens, lapis and turquoise and seashell moving along routes that would run for millennia. It is a slow, patient, unglamorous overture. No conquests, no monuments, just skills compounding. Brick, wheel, bead, boat, field, herd. And then, around 2600 BC, something happens for which archaeology has evidence but no narrative. Within a century or so, a breath in prehistoric time. The whole vast region transforms. Villages are abandoned and their people gather. New cities are founded on virgin ground, or old towns are leveled, filled, platformed, and rebuilt to master plans. The script standardizes, the brick standardizes, the brick standardizes, and across a territory of 1 million square kilometers there snaps into place. With astonishing speed and no visible violence, the mature Indus civilization. The integrated world of the great cities. What drove the integration? A religious movement? A trading confederation? An idea whose time had come? Nobody knows. It is the first of the great mysteries, the mystery of the beginning. What we can do is what the archaeologists did, walk into the finished result, street by street, and marvel. So let us go now, at evening, through the gates of the greatest of the cities, down into Mohenjo-daro itself, alive. Come into the city as a trader might have come, poling up a side channel from the great river at the end of a hot day, around 2500 BC. The first thing you see, from far across the plain, is that the city stands up out of the land. Not on a hill, for there are no hills, but on itself. On gigantic artificial platforms of mud, brick and earth, millions of cubic meters of fill, raised by communal labour above the reach of the Indus floods before a single house was built. Modern engineers who have calculated the platform's volume speak of them the way people speak of pyramids. Years of organised work by thousands. With this difference, which is the whole Indus difference, the pyramid lifted one dead king toward the sun. The platforms lifted everyone's houses out of the water. The city's monument is its foundation. You will look, all evening, for the palace and the temple tower, the way you would find them in any Mesopotamian city of the same century. And you will not find them. What the city spent itself on, you are walking on. Climb the ramp from the riverside, through a gateway in the brick perimeter, and enter the lower town. The great residential city, home to perhaps 30 or 40,000 people at its height. And feel the plan take hold of you. The main streets run wide and straight, north-south and east-west, dividing the city into great rectangular blocks. Smaller lanes cut the blocks at right angles. The whole is oriented to the cardinal points with an accuracy that implies sighting on the stars. After the organic tangle of every other ancient town on Earth, and of most towns since, the effect is uncanny. This is a designed city, the oldest large-scale example of urban planning known, laid out on a grid 4,500 years before planners reinvented the idea and called it modern. The streets themselves are unpaved earth, packed hard, gently cambered so that rain runs off to the sides, where the drains wait, but we will come to the drains. They deserve their own hour. Housefronts line the streets in long, plain, almost severe brick walls. Few windows on the street, doorways opening not onto the thoroughfares but onto the side lanes, so that the great streets run between quiet walls. A city, the excavators noted, that turned its face inward. Step through a doorway. The householder, in this city of merchants, would think it no strange request, and the severity explains itself. The house is built around a courtyard, an open square of light and air at the centre, invisible from the street, onto which every room opens. the cool heart of the home where the day's life happens. Cooking at the hearth, children underfoot, a loom in the shade, perhaps the family's zebu tethered in a corner. Rooms surround it on 2 stories. Stairways survive everywhere, and the thickness of the walls tells the engineers there was often an upper floor and a flat roof for sleeping in the hot months, exactly as the plains villagers sleep today. The floors are beaten earth or brick. The walls, once, were mud-plastered and perhaps painted. Timber columns held the gallery. And then the householder shows you, with what we may guess was quiet pride, the room that has amazed every visitor from that day to this, the bathing room. A small chamber floored with sawn bricks fitted so tight they hold water, its floor sloped precisely to a corner outlet, its walls damp-proofed. Here the family bathed, pouring water over themselves from jars, and the used water ran out through a terracotta pipe in the wall, out and down, and into the city's veins. Nearly every house has one. Many houses have their own brick-lined well besides. Some 700 wells served the city, so densely spread that no one carried water more than 100 meters. And many houses have, in a separate small chamber, the other convenience the ancient world almost nowhere else possessed: a latrine, brick-seated, flushed by hand with a jar of water draining to the street system, a private bathroom, a private toilet, running drainage, a well at the corner, in 2500 BC. The Pharaoh of Egypt, that same evening, lived in more splendor than anyone in this city, and in less sanitary comfort than nearly everyone in it. If the Indus civilization had a defining luxury, it was not gold. It was cleanliness, universal, engineered, and apparently non-negotiable. And to see where all that careful water went, we must now lift a manhole cover. They had manhole covers, and follow the city underground. It sounds, let us admit it, like the least romantic subject archaeology has to offer: drainage. And yet the drains of Mohenjo-daro have moved hard-headed engineers to something like reverence, and they deserve their unhurried hour at this fire, because they are, in sober fact, one of the great achievements of the ancient world. The first comprehensive urban sanitation system in human history, unmatched anywhere on Earth for most of the 4,000 years after it was built, and because nothing else the Indus people left behind tells us so much about how their minds worked. Follow the water. It leaves your host's bathing floor through the wall pipe and drops into a small covered channel of brick running along the lane. Every lane has one, laid with a fall calculated so gently and so consistently that the water keeps moving without scouring. The surveyors who measured the gradients found them held to tolerances that modern municipal codes would accept. The lane channel joins a street drain, larger, corbel-roofed in brick, big enough in the main streets for a worker to crouch in, and the street drains join collector mains that run beneath the great avenues and carry the city's water out through the perimeter to soak fields beyond. At every junction and at regular intervals along the runs, the builders set inspection openings covered with removable brick or stone slabs. Manholes, 4.5 millennia before the word, because a drain you cannot clean is a drain that has already failed, and these people were not builders of monuments that failed. The excavators found the system's maintenance history written in its fabric: silt traps. Brick sumps set into the runs to catch solids, emptied, on the evidence, on a regular schedule. Drains relaid and raised as street levels rose over the centuries. House outlets that discharged first into small terracotta settling jars set in the street, whose overflow only then entered the public channel. A grease trap, a primary treatment stage, at every house. Some houses on the main streets even had rubbish chutes built into their walls, feeding brick bins at street level that were, the layers of ash and sweepings say, periodically cleared. Sewerage, storm, drainage, household waste collection, scheduled maintenance, standardized components, a complete municipal sanitation department operating in the 26th century BC in every major city of the civilization at once. For this is not a Mohenjo-daro marvel, but an Indus signature. The same systems, to the same standards, appear at Harappa, at Dholavira, at little towns of a few hundred people that no empire would have bothered to plumb. Now sit with what the drains mean, because this is where they stop being plumbing and become philosophy. First, They are invisible. A pyramid announces, a ziggurat proclaims. A drain simply works, unseen, beneath the feet of people who need never think about it. A civilization that puts its greatest engineering underground has told you its values as clearly as Egypt told its own in stone, the Indus ideal. Visible in everything they made, as we shall keep seeing, was not glory but order, not the exceptional individual but the functioning whole, not the monument but the amenity. Second, they are universal. The drains do not serve a palace quarter and abandon the poor. They run down every lane. The humblest houses tie in. The standard of civic life was, so far as brick can testify, general. Whatever inequality this society held, and it held some. Houses differ in size, and we will weigh the question honestly later. Its basic infrastructure was the most egalitarian the ancient world ever built. And third, the deepest point, they are coordinated. A drainage system is not a house-by-house choice. Gradients must agree across a whole city. Mains must be planned before streets. Standards must hold for centuries of repairs. Somebody, council, guild, priesthood, custom itself grown strong as law, planned, financed, built, and maintained all this, generation after generation, in city after city, across 1,000,000 square kilometers. And that somebody left, so far as 100 years of digging can find, no throne, no crown, no name. The drains of Mohenjo-daro are the visible fingerprints of an invisible hand. The strongest evidence we possess for the Indus civilization's great absent presence. Government without rulers we can see. And before we go hunting for that invisible hand in earnest, the city has one more waterwork to show us, the one it did put on display, high on the citadel, where all the quiet mastery of water rises, just once, into something that looks very much like meaning. West of the lower town, across an open space, a second and higher platform rises. The citadel, the excavators called it, borrowing the word from more warlike worlds. A raised precinct of great public buildings, lifted a dozen meters above the plain on the most massive of all the city's foundations. Climb it in the last light and pass among the structures whose purposes archaeology still debates. The vast brick podium with ventilation channels that the diggers named the Great Granary, though not a grain of proof was found in it. The pillared hall whose rows of column bases suggest assemblies, councils, audiences of some kind, the so-called College of the Priests, a maze of rooms around courtyards that might have housed whoever administered whatever was administered here. Honest ignorance, as always tonight, keeps us company. But at the heart of the precinct lies the one building whose meaning no one seriously doubts, the crown of Indus architecture and its most eloquent statement, the Great Bath. Picture it as its builders finished it. A great open quadrangle, colonnaded on all four sides, and sunk at its centre a rectangular pool, 12 meters long, 7 wide, deep as a standing man and more. Approached at either end by wide brick stairways with timber treads once set in bitumen descending into the water. The engineering is the finest in the city, which is to say the finest in the world of its century. The pool's shell is built of tight sawn bricks laid on edge in gypsum mortar, backed by a full waterproofing membrane of bitumen, an inch-thick tar seal sandwiched within the walls, backed again by more brick and an earthen packing, a triple-layered watertight construction that held, and in places holds yet. A great brick-lined well in an adjoining room fed it. A corbelled outfall drain, tall as a person, emptied it for cleaning. Ranges of small rooms nearby, several with their own bathing floors, one with a stair perhaps to private chambers, suggest attendants or bathers of special status or preparation rites. Nothing about it is casual. Everything about it is careful in the way that sacred things are careful. For that is the conclusion to which the bath's every detail has driven almost every archaeologist who has studied it. This is not municipal swimming. This is ritual. The oldest great sacred water structure on Earth, ancestor in function, if not in unbroken line, to everything the subcontinent would later build around holy water. The temple tanks of South India, the bathing ghats of the Ganges, the stepped wells of Gujarat, the ritual pools beside mosques and gurdwaras. The whole immense South Asian civilization of sacred bathing, whose first and archetypal monument stands here on the citadel of Mohenjo-daro, 45 centuries old. What the rite was? Purification before worship? Initiation? Seasonal ceremony keyed to the river's rise? The privilege of an elite, or the obligation of a priesthood? The silent bricks cannot say. But set the bath beside everything else we have seen today, and a coherence emerges that is hard to resist. A civilization that gave every house a bathing floor, every lane a drain, every citizen clean water within 100 meters. And then, at the summit of its greatest city, on the platform where other civilizations raised the palace of the king or the tower of the god, built instead a perfect pool. Water below the streets, serving the body. Water above the city, serving, we may cautiously say, the spirit. If the Indus civilization had a visible theology, it was this: that purity is order, that order is sacred, and that the sacred is entered not by blood on an altar, but by stepping, clean, into still water. It is a guess. Tonight we will always say so when we guess, but it is a guess the whole city seems to make with us. And it casts its calm light forward, as we shall see at our journey's end, across 5,000 years of the civilization's descendants, for whom the confluence of rivers is holy to this day, and the morning immersion is prayer. Mohenjo-daro is the best preserved of the Indus cities, but it was never alone, and the civilization's true wonder is plural, the same order replicated. 5 great cities anchored the Indus world, with well over 1,000 towns and villages strung between them. And before we go looking for the people themselves, let us pay 3 quick visits. For each sister city adds a colour to the portrait, and one of them will bend everything we think we know about ancient engineering. Harappa first. The name giver, the railway's victim, 600 kilometres up the rivers from Mohenjo-daro in the Punjab. A city of the same rank and the same plan. Raised platforms, gridded lower town, drains, standardized brick, commanding the northern trade. The timber coming down from the Himalayan foothills, the routes east toward the Ganges lands and north toward the passes. The gold dust that came, the sources of a later age suggest, from far mountain rivers. Despite the brick robbers, Harappa has given archaeology some of its deepest sequences. The town's life runs continuously from long before the Great Integration until long after the cities faded. And some of its most human finds, the cemetery, of which more in its place, the workshops, and, in the granary quarter, rows of circular brick working floors with the ghost hollows of great wooden mortars at their centres, where labourers husked the city's grain. The thump of those pestles, multiplied across the quarter, must have been Harappa's heartbeat at dawn. Then Dolavira, and prepare, because Dolavira rearranges the mind. It stands far to the south, in what is now the Indian state of Gujarat, on an island in the salt marsh of the Rann of Kutch, a place that today is white desert, blinding and waterless half the year. There, on an island with no river at all, the Indus people built a major city. And they built it out of water management so audacious it reads like defiance. 2 seasonal streams flanking the site were dammed, check dams in series, stone-built. Their flash floods were caught, calmed, and led by channels into a girdle of enormous reservoirs. 16 and more of them, cut into bedrock and brick-lined, ringing the city within its walls. The largest as big as an Olympic pool multiplied and deep as a 3-story building, with rock-cut stairways descending into them. Street drains fed monsoon runoff into the chain. Every drop that fell on or near Dolavira was, by design, kept. Something like 1/10 of the walled area of the whole city was water storage. The result, an artificial oasis. A city of thousands living in gleaming masonry Dolavira, sitting on stone, built in stone amid the salt waste, sailing the seasonal marsh to the sea trade, secure through the rainless months on banked monsoon. If the drains of Mohenjo-daro show the Indus mine serving water, Dolavira shows it commanding water. The same genius turned from disposal to harvest. 4,000 years later, the water harvesting engineers of modern arid India have studied Dolavira's system and pronounced it, with professional humility, instructive. And Dolavira holds one more treasure, a strange and marvelous one, waiting for us in the hour we give to the script. Above its north gate, fallen face down in the ruin, and thereby preserved, lay a signboard. 10 large signs of the Indus script, each the height of a hand, once set in a wooden frame, gypsum white, to be read far across the plaza. The world's oldest known public inscription, which no one on earth can read. A city that mastered the desert, announcing something forever. And Lothal, last. Small, but freighted with meaning. A town near the head of the Gulf of Campat, where a brick-lined basin the size of a large swimming pool lies beside the ancient mound, connected by a channel toward the old river course, fitted with what appear to be a spillway and a gate arrangement. Its excavator called it a dockyard, a tidal dock, where the sea-going boats of the Indus trade could ride in on the high tide, load and unload at the adjacent warehouse whose brick floor yielded scores of ceilings. The clay impressions of merchants' seals, some still bearing on their backs the print of the packing cloth and cords they once secured, and ride out again on the next tide. Scholars have argued the basin's function ever since. Dock or reservoir? As scholars should. But the ceilings, the warehouse, the bead factory with its furnace, and the town's whole seaward orientation tell one story regardless. Lothal faced the ocean and lived by it. From here, and from ports like it along the coast, the ships went out. Down the Gulf, along the desert shores, west toward the mouths of other rivers where other civilizations waited with cuneiform ledgers open. And it is time we followed them, out of the cities and into the world. The world that wrote down, in a script we can read, the name of the country we have been walking through all evening, Meluha. One more sister deserves her portrait before we sail. Smaller than the Great Four, and keeper of 2 of the most quietly moving discoveries in all Indus archaeology. Kalibangan. The name means bangles, black bangles, after the burnt shards that litter the mound. Stands far up the eastern river, on the bank of the vanished stream itself, a middle-sized town of the middle rank. The twin mound plan in miniature. A walled citadel and a gridded lower town, the standard brick, the standard drains. The whole civilization, as we keep finding, folded complete into every size of settlement, like a pattern that repeats at any scale. But beneath the town, sealed under the foundations of the mature city, the excavators came upon something that made agricultural historians catch their breath. A field. An actual field surface of the early Harappan age, preserved by burial. And across it, fossilized in the old soil, the furrows of a plough. A grid of them, 2 sets crossing at right angles, wide furrows one way and narrow the other. The pattern, precisely, of the cross-ploughing still practiced in the same district today, where farmers run mustard in the wide rows and chickpeas in the narrow between. It is the oldest ploughed field ever found on Earth, the humble ancestor of every furrow in the subcontinent, and it lies there under the town like a signature at the bottom of a page. Before the cities, before the seals and the script and the great bath, this, a farmer and an ox, turning the riverside earth in 2 directions, 47 centuries before our night at the fire. Nothing in Indus archaeology says home so plainly. And on the citadel above, Kalibangan keeps its second treasure, already glimpsed in our religious dossier and worth a closer look now, the fire altars. A row of 7 clay-lined pits along a platform, each holding ash, charcoal, and a standing clay stele at the centre. Nearby, a well and a bathing platform. Similar installations in private courtyards across the lower town, always, the excavators noted, with the same components. The pit, the fire, the upright, the water close at hand. Interpretations divide as they must. Domestic hearths have partisans, though hearths do not usually come in ceremonial rows of 7 beside bathing floors. But the excavator's reading has held the field for half a century. Ritual fire, tended communally on the high place and privately at home, in a town that also honoured ritual water, the 2 great purifiers, side by side, on one small citadel. The fire lowers its voice, as it promised to do. Whether these pits are ancestors of the Vedic fire cult, that would later rule these very lands. The altar, the offering, the sacred flame at the heart of the ritual. No one can prove. The gap is centuries wide, and fire is humanity's commonest holy thing. But stand at Calibangan, and the sightlines are hard to refuse. Below the town, the world's oldest ploughed field. On its height, rows of ritual fires beside the water. Around it, the river that later memory would mourn as the lost Sarasvati. The town reads like a hinge, a place where the deep agricultural past, the Indus order, and the religious future of the subcontinent are all visible from one small mound. The great cities awe us. Calibangan, somehow, moves us. A middling town on a doomed river, keeping the two oldest human covenants, bread and flame, in perfect modest order until the water left. Then its people scattered the embers and walked east with everyone else, and the fields slept under the town, and the town under the sand, holding its furrows straight in the dark for 4,500 years, waiting for someone to come back and read, in the oldest handwriting on earth, the plain sentence, "We farmed here, and we kept the fires." Here is one of the quiet thrills of ancient history. The Indus civilization, mute in its own voice, appears. Named, described, invoiced, in the writing of its trading partners. In the cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia, from the age of Sargon of Akkad onward, there recurs the name of a far eastern land across the sea, Meluha, and the near-universal judgment of scholarship is that Meluha is the Indus world. Sargon himself, around 2300 BC, boasts in an inscription that ships of Meluha, ships of Magan, ships of Dilmun tied up at the quay of his capital Agade. Three names that map the sea road east. Dilmun, the entrepot island of Bahrain, Magan, the copper coast of Oman, and beyond them, Meluha, the terminus, the source country of marvels. The tablets itemize what came from it, and the list reads like the cargo manifest of everything we have been finding in the ruins. Carnelian, the flame-red stone, the Indus lapidaries worked better than anyone on earth. Lapis lazuli, brokered onward from the Afghan mines. Copper and gold, ivory and objects of ivory. Combs, inlays, gaming pieces, exotic timbers, peacocks, perhaps, and monkeys, and a certain red dog of Meluha that won Mesopotamian text records with the delight of a novelty. Even, the philologists suspect in a few words, sesame and cotton. Meluhan crops beginning their world careers. Traffic ran thick enough that Meluhan traders lived in Mesopotamia. A cylinder seal survives belonging to one Suilisu, Meluha interpreter, a man who made his living translating between the two worlds and whose seal is, in its way, the loneliest artifact of the age. The profession existed. The language it translated is lost. By the 21st century BC, there was a village of Meluha in southern Sumer, an expatriate Indus community, farming Mesopotamian fields, paying Mesopotamian taxes, its members bearing Sumerian names in the tax rolls, the first documented immigrant community in world history, and its old country is the country we cannot read. The archaeology matches the ledgers, object for object. Indus seals, the square steatite stamps with the unicorn and the unread signs, have been dug from the ruins of Kish, Nippur, and a dozen other Mesopotamian sites. Indus-made carnelian beads, of the long biconical kind that only Indus drills could bore, lay in the death pits of the royal cemetery of on the breasts of Sumerian queens. Queen Puabi went to her grave wearing, among her gold, the work of Gujarati bed shops. Indus weights turn up in the customs houses of Dilmun, where the island's merchants adopted the Indus standard outright for the eastern trade, as ports adopt the currency of their best customer. Indus-style etched beads, Indus dice, Indus-shaped pottery scatter up the Gulf. And in the other direction, this is one of the enduring puzzles. Remarkably little. A few Mesopotamian-type cylinder seals in Indus cities, a trickle of Gulf goods, and otherwise silence, which the economic historians read plainly. The balance ran east. Meluha sold and was paid. In silver, in wool perhaps, in perishables that left no trace, and needed little that the West could make. The carriers of all this were real ships on a real, monsoon-timed sea road. The flat representations on Indus seals and tablets show high-prowed vessels with cabins and steering oars and, once, a bird perched aboard. The shore-sighting bird of ancient navigation, released to fly toward invisible land, a trick the sailors of these seas kept for millennia. The coasting route ran from the Indus mouths and the Gujarat ports past Makran, where the Indus people planted an outpost at Sutkagundur, a fortified trading station on the barren shore, the westernmost brick of the civilization to Oman's copper, Dilmun's markets, and the river mouths of Suma. Picture it once, whole, as the fire likes to do. A summer morning around 2350 BC. In a clerk presses into damp clay the receipt for a Meluhan cargo. On Dilmun, a customs man checks it against a chert cube made in the Indus to the Indusgram. Off Makran, a high-prowed ship runs west with the tail of the monsoon, carnelian and ivory under its deck. In Lothal, a drill master sets a buoy to the next batch of bead blanks, and none of them, not one, knows they are holding together the first intercontinental economy in the history of the world. That is the Indus abroad. Everywhere in the ledgers, nowhere in the legends, the trading partner everyone counted on and no one, afterward, remembered. What made Meluha worth sailing to was, in the end, hands. And the Indus workshops housed some of the most skilled hands of the entire ancient world. Their masterpiece material was carnelian, and the carnelian long bead their signature, a slender biconical bead of flame-orange stone, up to a hand's breadth long, drilled end-to-end through its whole length. And that drilling is the marvel. Carnelian is nearly as hard as the drills of any age, and the Indus lapidaries bored it with rods of an artificial super-hard stone of their own invention. Fired, recrystallized rock the archaeologists call ernestite after its identifier, spun with abrasive and patience that experiments have measured. A single long bead cost, by replication, hundreds of hours of drilling. A necklace of them was years of a master's life, and priced accordingly from Ur's royal graves to the treasuries of Elam. Around the drill grew a whole chemistry. The makers heat-treated dull brown stone to strike the orange fire out of it. They etched white designs into red beads with hot alkaline pastes. A decorated beadware so distinctive that its scatter maps the Indus trade across half of Asia. And in faience. The manufactured, glaze-hard paste the Egyptians also loved. They achieved compositions fired at temperatures and to strengths that materials scientists still find precocious. Add the bronze smiths, casting by lost wax a naturalism far ahead of the age. The shell workers of the coast, sawing conch into bangles and ladles and inlay on an industrial scale, whole townlets given over to the wine of the shell saws. The potters, wheel-throwing sturdy red ware painted in black with peacocks, fish, and pipal leaves by the 100,000. The weavers, whose cotton, the world's first, survives only as ghost textures corroded onto metal, but whose craft the Meluha trade itemized and the later world inherited. The ivory carvers, the seal cutters, patience itself, of whom more shortly. And the sum is a civilization whose glory was not monumental but portable. It built no colossi and carved no palace reliefs, and put its genius instead into things a hand can hold. A bead, a bangle, a blade, a seal. The Indus aesthetic in one sentence, perfection at small scale, repeated at large scale. And then there are the two small figures who have become, by the accident of survival and the justice of art, the faces of the civilization. And they make a pair so opposite that they seem to have been sent down to us as a deliberately balanced delegation. The first is bronze, 10 centimeters tall, from Mohenjo-daro, a girl. The world calls her the dancing girl, though no one knows that she dances. Standing hip-shot and utterly at ease, head high, one arm stacked with bangles from wrist to shoulder resting on her hip, the other loose at her side. Naked, but for the bangles and a necklace, hair in a heavy braid, her face. The features suggest to many the tribal peoples of the subcontinent, set in an expression that every viewer reads the same way at first sight and no scholar has improved upon: confidence, cheek even. A teenager, cast in bronze by the lost wax method with total command, looking out of the 25th century BC as if she owned it. The oldest bronze figure of a human being from the subcontinent, and one of the most alive small sculptures ever made anywhere. The second is stone, 17 centimeters, also from Mohenjo-daro, a bearded man. The world calls him the priest king, though no one knows that he was either. Heavy-lidded eyes half closed as if in trance or hauteur, hair bound in a fillet with a circular ornament at the brow, a robe patterned with trefoils once inlaid red drawn over one shoulder in a fashion the later subcontinent would keep for holy men, composed, inward, authoritative, cold. Between them, these two 10-centimeter people have carried a century of speculation about their whole world. She read as the free, ornamented, self-possessed commoner. He as the austere authority of whatever governed. She all motion, he all stillness. And honesty requires the usual lantern. Both readings are our projections on unlabeled art, but stand them side by side, as the museums of two nations now stand them in the mind partition divided even the statuettes. She rests in Delhi, he in Karachi, and the pair does say one true thing that no caution can dissolve. This civilization, which built no giant images of anyone, could render a human being, swagger or trance, girl or greybeard, with a subtlety the Colossus builders never matched. It looked closely at people, which is fitting, because the next things it made, the little stones on which its whole economy balanced, show it looked just as closely at fairness. Two crafts remain that carried the civilization on their backs, and they deserve their own hour, because one of them armed the workshops, and the other, quite literally, clothed the future of the world. The metal first. The Indus was a copper and bronze civilization of the first rank, and its supply lines alone tell a story of continental organization. Copper up from the great mines of the Aravalli Hills to the southeast, and in from Oman across the Gulf. Those Magan ingots riding home in the Maluha ships. Tin, bronze's rarer partner, trickling down the mountain roads from Afghanistan and Central Asia, so precious that the smiths learned to stretch it, and much Indus bronze runs leaner in tin than a Mesopotamian smith would pour. Gold washed from far northern rivers. Silver, scarcest of all in the subcontinent, arriving. The fire suspects with the economists, largely as Suma's payment for beads and cotton, and hoarded in buried jars against no emergency that ever came. What the smiths made with it all fills the site museums, the flat axes and chisels and adzes of the carpenters who timbered the ceilings, saws with true set teeth. An Indus innovation centuries ahead of its neighbours, that sliced the tight-fitting bricks of the bathing floors, razors in a dozen patterns for a famously well-groomed population, fish hooks by the thousand, the little chisels and bearings of the seal cutters, mirrors polished to a soft gold gaze, and the lost wax masterpieces we have already met. The dancing girl, the model carts, the small bronze buffalo lowering his horns. What the smiths did not make. The note rings once more, quietly. Was weaponry worth the name? The spearheads stay thin and unribbed, the arrowheads light, the swords simply absent. The same furnaces that could cast a girl's insouciance in bronze were never asked, in 700 years, to cast a battle blade. Metallurgy is a mirror of demand. The Indus mirror shows carpenters, barbers, fishermen, jewelers, and no soldiers. And between furnace and loom stands one pyrotechnic feat that deserves its own small monument, because materials scientists still study it with narrowed eyes. The stoneware bangle. Most Indus bangles, as we shall see on the morning streets, were common terracotta, made by the million, but for some restricted circle. And the restriction is the mystery. The kiln masters of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa produced something else entirely. Bangles of ordinary clay fired so precisely, in sealed containers stacked inside special kilns, at temperatures pressed to the very edge of what ancient pyrotechnology could reach, that the clay vitrified, fused glass hard through its body, grey-black, thin as fine metal, ringing when struck, polished to a soft sheen, ceramic pretending, successfully, to be stone. The process, reconstructed from kiln wreckage and wasters, was brutal in its economics. The bangles were fired inside lidded jars sealed with clay. protecting the surfaces, controlling the atmosphere. And the surviving debris shows whole sealed batches sacrificed to warping and overfiring for a handful of perfect circles. Each survivor represents a mastery of temperature, timing, and chemistry that would not be routine again for millennia. And then, the telling detail. Many stoneware bangles carry, scratched minute before firing, short inscriptions. Among the tiniest writing in the whole Indus corpus, signs so small they can barely be read by the naked eye, on an object worn against the skin. Something is being said here that we cannot hear. An ornament requiring industrial virtuosity, produced in deliberately limited numbers, marked with microtexts, found mostly in the two greatest cities. The archaeologist's cautious guess is a badge, of office, of clan, of membership in whatever quiet circle kept the standards and needed no palace. If the Indus had regalia, this may be it. Not a golden crown proclaiming one ruler to a crowd, but a thin, dark ring of perfected clay, whispering its unread sentence around an anonymous wrist. It would be, the fire admits, entirely in character. Then the loom. And here the story runs far past the Indus itself, because cotton is the civilization's longest gift. The plant had been tamed back in Mehrgar's deep centuries. By the mature age, it was a field crop across the floodplain, and the cities had built around it the world's first cotton industry. Spindle halls in every house floor spinning was the endless background labor of the age, the original cottage industry, thread by firelight, dye vats and mordant chemistry. The madder-red textiles clinging in corroded ghosts to silver jars are not just the oldest dyed cotton known, they testify to true dye technology. Fixing colour fast in vegetable fibre is chemistry, not luck. Weaving on looms that have left their weights and their impressions. Cloth textures printed on the backs of sealing clay, plain weaves and finer ones, the packing fabric of the Maluha trade. And export, the Mesopotamian references suggest, of the cloth itself, wool's strange vegetable rival from the Eastern Sea. Now lift the thread and follow it out of the trench. From these fields and halls, cotton spread, slowly, port by port, and century by century, to become the fibre of Egypt's later ages, of classical India's fabled muslins, of the medieval Islamic world, of the mills that lit the Industrial Revolution, of the shirt very possibly against your shoulders as you listen tonight. Wheat and cattle humanity, domesticated many times in many places. Cotton's great old world lineage runs back to one river country and its patient farmers. It is a strange and pleasing accounting. The civilization that left no names, no epics, and no empires dressed more of subsequent humanity than Rome ever ruled. Its true monument, not brick at all, but thread. Spun in courtyards by women whose names were never written, even when writing lived, and never once broken since. Among the commonest finds in every Indus city. In shops, in houses, at gateways, in the ruins of what look like customs points, are small, polished cubes of banded chert, cut and ground with jeweller's precision. They are weights, and they are, in their undramatic way, among the most astonishing objects the ancient world has left us, because they are all the same, not similar, the same. The system is binary in its lower registers, each weight doubling the last, 1, 2, 4, 8, up to 64. Then stepping by larger multiples into the trade sizes, the whole sequence anchored on a base unit of about 13.7 grams. And this identical system, tuned to the same gram, appears in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, in Dolavira and Lothal, and the smallest excavated hamlets. Across, again, that 1,000,000 square kilometres, and holds, the metrologists report, to accuracies within a percent or two. A merchant could carry his weight set from the Arabian Sea to the Himalayan foothills and never once argue with a local scale. Rulers survive too. Bronze rods and an exquisite ivory scale from Lothal, marked in graduations under 2 millimeters, from which the surveyors derive an Indus foot and cubit that reappear in the proportions of the buildings and the very bricks. The 421 brick is the measuring system fired in clay. Nothing else in antiquity approaches this. Egypt's and Mesopotamia's weights wobble by region and era, kings proclaiming standards that markets quietly ignored. The Indus standard simply held for 700 years without, as far as we can see, anyone proclaiming anything. And that is why these little stones carry such enormous interpretive weight of their own. They are the sharpest edge of the civilization's central mystery. Standardization on this scale, sustained over these distances and centuries, is what states do. It implies inspection, enforcement, calibration, some machinery of authority reaching into every market of the realm. Yet the machinery is precisely what the Indus refuses to show us. Excavate any Mesopotamian city of the same date and authority confronts you in the first season. The palace, vast and central, the temple estates with their ration lists, the royal tombs heavy with gold and retainers, the victory stels, the striding kings, the bound captives, the name of the ruler stamped on the bricks themselves. A century of digging across 2,000 Indus sites has produced no certain palace. The largest houses are larger, but modestly, and none is set apart in splendor. No royal tomb, no Indus grave, as we shall see, outglitters its neighbors by more than a family's comfortable margin. No monumental art of rulership, not one image in the entire corpus of a person triumphing over another person, no named individual at all. The greatest cities of their age run to standards their contemporaries never matched, and apparently nobody in charge. Scholars have filled the vacuum with a spectrum of guesses, and the fire will lay them out fairly. Perhaps a priestly corporate rule, authority worn as ritual rather than crown. The priest-king's trance instead of the pharaoh's whip. Perhaps merchant oligarchies, guilds enforcing the standards on which their own commerce depended. The weights self-policing, as good money polices itself. Perhaps councils of cities, a civilization run as a confederation of municipalities. Perhaps rotating or dual authorities, as Dolivira's twinned precincts hint. Perhaps a dominant ideology. An idea, held strongly enough, needs fewer spears. Or perhaps we simply have not found the palaces yet. Though 2,000 sites into the search, that caution wears thin. What can be said with confidence is the negative, and it is one of the most interesting negatives in world history. Whatever governed the Indus, it did not need or did not want to be seen. Every other early civilization poured its surplus into making power visible, and the Indus poured its surplus into drains, wells, platforms, and standard weights, into making order ordinary. Power as spectacle or power as plumbing. The ancient world's two answers, and only one of them still carries our traffic on its railway embankments. Which brings us, for if anything in this civilization spoke aloud, it was these, to the seals. If the Indus civilization has a face it chose for itself, it is the seal, a small square stamp of steatite, soapstone, carved and then fired hard. Most no bigger than a postage stamp, pierced through a boss at the back for a cord, worn presumably at the wrist or neck of its owner. Thousands survive. They are the master artworks of the culture and the carriers of its writing, and each one holds, in a few square centimeters, everything we know and everything we do not. Along the top, a line of script. Neat, confident, unreadable. Below, cut in intaglio, with breathtaking sureness, an animal, standing before a curious object scholars call, with due helplessness, the standard or the feeder. Press the seal into damp clay. And the sealings, the impressions themselves, survive too, on the tags of long-rotted bales from the Lothal warehouse. And the design springs up in relief, a signature, a brand, a mark of ownership or office or clan, doing for Indus commerce what the cylinder seal did for Sumer, binding goods to persons across distance and time. The animals are a bestiary of the riverine world rendered by masters. The humped zebu bull in massive dignity, dewlap swinging, the water buffalo head down and truculent, the elephant, the rhinoceros, the tiger glancing back over its shoulder, the gharial crocodile, and, rarest and strangest, composite beasts. 3 heads on one body, part bull, part elephant, part tiger. Myth compressed into a thumbnail. But the lord of the seals, carved on more of them than every other animal combined, is a creature that walked no riverbank, a graceful single-horned quadruped shown always in profile, one sweeping horn curving from its brow. body of an antelope or ox drawn with heraldic elegance, the unicorn. The word is used advisedly, whether the artists meant a two-horned beast in strict profile or a genuinely fabulous one-horned animal, the consistency of the image. Always the single horn, always the same attendant standard before it. Argues an icon, not a sketch. The emblem, perhaps, of the civilization's dominant clan or merchant community or cult. The totem of whoever it was that needed no palace. It is a fittingly Indus choice of majesty, where Mesopotamia stamped its clay with gods trampling enemies and kings gripping lions. The greatest power in the Indus world signed itself as a slender, peaceable, probably imaginary herbivore standing quietly before an unexplained object. And when, 1,000 years and more after the cities fell, the Greek envoys to India would report that in that far country there lived a swift wild ass with a single horn, feeding the legend of the unicorn down all the centuries of the West. Some scholars permit themselves the pleasing suspicion that the rumour's deepest root was here, that the last ghost of the Indus civilization to reach the world's imagination was its emblem, wandered loose from its forgotten seals. The seals, then, art, identity, economy, myth, and above every carved creature, that line of signs, and the fire can circle no longer. It is time to face the script itself, the 4,000-year-old silence at the centre of everything. Let us first see it clearly, because the Indus script is beautiful, a confident, well-made writing system. Signs shaped like fish and jars and men and combs and wheels and things no one can name, drawn with the economy of long practice. About 400 distinct signs by most counts, written the cramping at line ends shows chiefly right to left. Found on the seals, on ceilings, on pottery, on copper tablets and tools, on bone and ivory rods, and on the great Dolavira signboard, publishing 10 tall signs to a city plaza. Whoever wrote it the same way everywhere, from the mountains to the sea. One script, standardized like the weights and the bricks for 700 years. And here is the sum of what humanity has read of it, after 100 years of effort by philologists, mathematicians, and latterly computers. Nothing. Not a name, not a word, not a syllable with certainty. It is the most studied undeciphered script on earth. Well over 100 published decipherments, each convincing chiefly to its author. And the fire owes you the honest reasons why it resists, because the reasons are the story. Every historical decipherment has climbed on one of 3 ladders, and the Indus offers none of them. No bilingual. Egyptian fell to the Rosetta Stone, Persian cuneiform to trilingual cliff inscriptions. But no patient Mesopotamian clerk, so far as we have found, ever wrote the same text in cuneiform and Indus signs side by side. The interpreter Suilizu, who carried both worlds in his head, left us only his job title. No known descendant language. Linear B fell when it proved to hide early Greek. But what tongue hides in the Indus signs is itself the war. Dravidian, say many, ancestral to the languages of South India. And there are elegant arguments, the fish sign readings, the starfish puns, the Dravidian pocket surviving today in the Brahui Hills beside the Indus itself. Early Indo-Aryan, say others, with arguments entangled, as we shall see near Journey's End, in modern identity and politics. Something lost entirely, say the sobering third voice. A language that died without issue, like most languages in history. And no long texts. This is the cruelest shortage. The average inscription is 5 signs, the longest known, 26. There are no Indus books, no letters, no law codes. Or rather, perhaps there were, in abundance, written on palm leaf, cotton, bark, wood, everything the monsoon climate eats. What survives is what stone and fired clay could carry. Labels, essentially, a civilization known entirely from its luggage tags. Some scholars have even argued the signs are not full writing at all, but an emblem system. Heraldry, not language. The majority still holds it is true writing, pointing to the ordered sign sequences that computers confirm behave statistically like language. But statistics cannot name a single fish, so the honest position. And tonight of all nights, At this fire of all fires, let us hold it with something other than frustration. Is this: somewhere beneath those 400 signs lie the names of the cities we have walked all evening, the name of the unicorn, the word for the great bath and what was done there, the titles, if titles there were, of whoever kept the weights honest. Prayers, perhaps? Jokes, perhaps? The ordinary music of a language that 30,000 people spoke in the lanes of Mohenjo-daro on any given evening for 7 centuries. All of it present, preserved, and sealed. The Indus script is not a blank. It is a locked room to which the key was lost. And decipherments do still happen. Linear B yielded in living memory, the Maya glyphs within a lifetime, a single lucky spade, one bilingual tablet in the mud of one long text in some unexcavated mound among the thousands, could open the room in an afternoon, and every Indus archaeologist digs, quietly, with that afternoon in mind. Until then, the civilization keeps the deepest privacy any great people has ever kept. We may walk its streets, weigh its silver, drink from its wells, and admire its unicorn. But we may not, yet, hear it speak. And so we do what respectful guests do in a house where we do not know the language. We watch, all the more closely, how the household actually lived, which is exactly where the fire goes next, into the lanes at morning, among the potters and the children and the smell of baking bread, the daily life of the quietest civilization on earth. Before we leave the signs to their silence, one question more can be asked of them. Not what they say, but who they spoke to. And the answer, pieced from where the writing turns up rather than what it means, sketches one of the most unexpected portraits of the night. The Indus may have been, for its age, an unusually literate world. Consider the distribution, because it is everything. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, writing lived at the top. Temple and palace archives, scribal schools training a professional caste, monumental texts addressed by kings to gods and posterity. Literacy as an instrument of the state, held by perhaps one person in 100. Indus writing lives everywhere else, on merchants' seals by the 1,000, worn on the body like identity itself. On the little clay ceilings that secured everyday bales and jars, scratched and painted on ordinary cooking pots and water jars before firing and after. Marks of owners, makers, contents, in kitchens and storerooms, on copper tablets, small and standardized, that some scholars read as tokens or licenses of some kind, passing hand to hand. On bangles, on tools, on bone rods, on the humble furniture of ordinary lives. And, at Dolavira, blazing in gypsum a hand high over a public gateway, where a sign meant nothing unless the crowd in the plaza could take its meaning at a glance. Writing addressed to the few looks like Egypt's, writing scattered like this. Domestic, commercial, portable, public. Looks like writing meant to be read, at least in its short practical registers, by a broad slice of the town. The shopkeeper checking a tag, the housewife marking her storage jars, the porter matching seal to consignment. Add the graffiti. Casual signs scratched on sherds after firing, the ancient equivalent of a note jotted on scrap, which occur at small villages as well as metropolises, and the picture strengthens. This was not a priesthood secret. It was a working literacy, thin perhaps but wide, woven into commerce and housekeeping across the whole standardized world. And that reframes the tragedy of the decipherment in a way worth carrying gently through the rest of the night. We have been mourning, all night, the lost proclamations, the unread names of kings who may never have existed. But if the distribution tells true, what the Indus wrote was mostly not proclamation at all. It was the paperwork of ordinary honesty. This jar is mine. This bale is paid for. This weight is true. This is the potter who made me. A civilization whose writing served the market stall and the kitchen shelf rather than the throne room. Writing as one more public utility, like the wells and the drains, unglamorous, universal, maintained. Even the sign forms carry the civic fingerprint. 400 signs held stable across 1,000,000 square kilometers for 7 centuries. An orthographic standard kept as faithfully as the brick ratio by whatever quiet consensus kept everything else. Perhaps that is why no Indus Gilgamesh, no victory hymn, ever seems to have been carved in stone for us to find. Not only because the palm leaf books rotted, though they did, but because this culture, true to itself in this as in all things, may never have felt that the important writing was the kind addressed to eternity. The important writing was the kind addressed to your neighbour, short, clear, honest, and everywhere. Eternity, as it turned out, got the drains instead. And the drains, unlike the boasts of every literate king of that millennium, are still exactly where their builders said they would be, doing exactly what they promised. There are worse fates for a civilization's word. Come back into the lower town at first light, 4,500 years ago, and let the city wake around you, because this is what the Indus evidence does best. Not kings and battles, but breakfast. And there is a deep pleasure, at this hour of the night, in a civilization whose surviving story is almost entirely made of ordinary mornings. The light comes up grey gold over the flat roofs where families have slept out the hot night. Smoke rises from courtyard hearths. The first sound, up and down the lanes, is grinding. The household querns, stone on stone, turning the day's wheat and barley to flour, a sound that will not stop until dusk, and that was, multiplied by 10,000 households, the true voice of the city. The bread goes onto clay griddles and into tandoor-style ovens, whose descendants still bake across the same lands. Flatbreads, almost certainly the ancestors of the chapati and naan of the later subcontinent, eaten with barley porridge, with lentils and chickpeas and mung beans from the pulse fields, with sesame oil, with mustard greens. The charred kitchen debris the archaeobotanists sieve from the hearths reads like the shopping list of a modern Punjabi village, and that continuity, 5,000 years of roughly the same good breakfast, is one of the quiet wonders of the whole story. There was dairy in abundance. The fat residues soaked into potsherds prove milk, curd, butter, ghee, the zebu herds paying their daily rent. Fish from the river, dried fish traded deep inland Harappan sites far from water are full of marine fishbone. Someone ran a saltfish business on a continental scale, fowl, and here a world historical footnote struts into view. The chicken, domesticated from the red jungle fowl of these very lands, seems to have begun its planetary career in and around the Indus world. Every egg humanity has ever fried since owes a debt to these particular farmyards. Game came in from the marshes, and on feast days, the bone heaps say beef and mutton and pork. Whatever later taboos would grow in these lands, the Indus table did not yet know them. Dress the city now. Cotton, of course. Their invention, their signature, men in the reliefs and figurines wear a cloth-wrapped waist to knee, a shawl over the shoulder against winter, women a knee-length skirt and elaborate belts. And everyone, this is the delight of the figurines. War ornament. Bangles above all. The Indus was a bangle civilization the way Egypt was a gold one. Arms stacked wrist to shoulder like the dancing girls, in materials grading precisely by purse. Shell for the coast. Terracotta for every man. They are the single commonest artifact in every excavation. The cities crunch with broken bangles, faience in blue-green, copper and bronze, and for the wealthy, the astonishing seaside-fired stoneware bangles, thin as metal, ringing like porcelain, made by a process so exacting that kiln wasters show whole batches sacrificed for a few perfect circles. Necklaces of carnelian and agate and jade-green amazonite, gold in restrained good taste, fillets, ear ornaments, the occasional hoard buried under a floor and never retrieved, combs of ivory, bronze mirrors, and little pots of cosmetics. Coal sticks, red ochre, cinnabar. The Indus face was made up. No crowns anywhere, no regalia, just a whole urban population, from the ceiling's merchants to the potter's daughters, comfortably, democratically adorned. Prosperity worn on the body, in a world that built no treasuries to hoard it. And the work. Walk the lanes, and the city sorts itself before you, block by block, into the world's oldest visible industrial districts. Here the potter's quarter, kilns already warm, wheels humming, rows of yesterday's water jars drying. There the bead makers, the tap-tap of the church saws, and the whisper of the bow drills, apprentice boys sweeping agate dust. The shell workers with their baskets of conch up from the coast. The metalsmith's lane, smoke and hammer song, casting axes and razors, and the little bronze buffalo with lowered horns, the dyer's vats. Madder red cloth, the oldest dyed cotton on earth, comes from these cities, the brickyards outside the walls, feeding the eternal construction, and threading it all, the carriers. Men with shoulder poles, laden zebu, and the solid-wheeled ox carts whose terracotta models the children played with, and whose full-sized ruts score the excavated streets. The same cart, wheel for wheel, that creaked past our mound at dusk when tonight began. Order everywhere, hurry nowhere. If you listen for what is missing from the morning, it is the sounds every other ancient city would force on you. No overseer's lash, no royal herald, no temple gong commanding the day, no soldier's drill. The city runs, to all archaeological appearances, the way its drains run, by design so good it needs no shouting. Whether that silence in the record is the whole truth of Indus life, no honest teller can promise. Absence of evidence, the fire always remembers, is not evidence of absence. But it is the silence the stones themselves keep, and in the middle of it, from every courtyard, comes the one sound the Indus cities have preserved more abundantly than any civilization of their age: children playing. Here is a fact to hold up against every empire this fire has ever visited. No early civilization on Earth has left archaeologists more toys than the Indus. Not more weapons, more toys. They come out of the houses of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa by the basketful, and they are so charming, so mechanically inventive, and so unmistakably loved that a century of sober scholars has failed to write about them without smiling. Terracotta ox carts, exact miniatures of the street's real ones, with working axles and little detachable drivers, whistles shaped like birds, rattles with pellets sealed inside, spinning tops, marbles by the hundred, miniature cooking sets, tiny pots, tiny querns, tiny griddles for a courtyard game of house that has evidently not changed in 5 millennia, and the mechanical marvels, little bulls with heads that nod on a pivot, monkeys made to slide down a cord, animal figures on wheels, pull toys with holes for the string. The string is gone, the hole remains, and through that small hole one can see, more vividly than through any monument, an actual child, 4,500 years ago, running down a brick lane pulling a wheeled clay ram, followed. The paw prints pressed into drying bricks confirm the household roster, by the family dog. The grown-ups played too. Dice, true cubical dice, marked 1 to 6, essentially indistinguishable from the pair in any modern game box, are an Indus commonplace, among the oldest known anywhere, and they were thrown seriously. Gaming pieces in sets, boards scratched on bricks and worked in ivory, cone and pawn assemblages that prototype the race games of later ages. The subcontinent's immortal love affair with dice, which fills the later epics, where kingdoms are staked and lost on a throw, begins here, in the courtyards of the bead makers, on evenings after work. And whether toy or tool or a little of both, the fire cannot leave this part without its strangest plaything. From several sites come terracotta birds that are, in form, unmistakable whistling water toys and small clay figures whose interpretation genuinely divides the field. But the honest sum is simpler and better than any single marvel. This civilization manufactured childhood, deliberately, skillfully, at scale. Kilns that fired ritual objects and roof tiles also fired nodding bulls and bird whistles, which means workshops allocated time to delight, which means families paid for delight, which means a society that, whatever its unread laws and invisible rulers, budgeted for the happiness of small children as a matter of course. Set that beside the weapon heaps of contemporary graves elsewhere, and the Indus makes its quiet statement one more time. Some civilizations are best known by their armories. This one is best known by its toy box, and by the animals its children rode, herded, feared, and modelled in clay, which deserve the next hour to themselves. For the animals of the Indus are a cast of characters in their own right, and one famous animal, by its absence, will echo all the way to the end of our story. Begin with the king of the farmyard and, on the evidence of the seals, something close to the king of the imagination, the zebu, the humped bull of the subcontinent, domesticated in these lands back at Mehrgar, and by the city's great days the pivot of the whole economy. Plough engine, cart engine, milk source, dung fuel the plains timber could not feed every hearth. The cakes of dung drying on courtyard walls today dried on Harappan walls identically, and, beyond all utility, an image of majesty. The great seal carvers reserved some of their finest work for the massive dewlapped bull standing alone, monumental in a square inch. An icon of potency and patience that the subcontinent never afterward let go. The bull of Shiva, the sanctity of the cow, the entire bovine devotion of later India has its deepest visible roots in the Indus reverence for this animal. Around the zebu, the domestic circle, water buffalo wallowing in the village tanks then as now, sheep and goats in the drier margins, pigs rooting the refuse. The dog, pariah type, terracotta-modelled wearing collars, which tells its own small story of affection. The cat, present and mousing one famous brick, carries the overlapping prints of a cat pursued by a dog across the wet clay yard, a 3-second chase fired into permanence. The donkey for packwork, and the camel arriving late at the margins. The chicken we have met, scratching its way into world history. And at the wild frontier, the rivers and reed jungles supplied the seal carver's gallery. Elephant. And more than gallery, dung and molar finds suggest captive elephants, which would make the Indus the first elephant-taming culture on Earth, opening a partnership that would carry Indian history on its back for 4,000 years. Rhinoceros, then abundant on the Indus, now vanished from it. Tiger, prowling the cane brakes close enough to town that the potters modelled him, and one poignant seal shows a figure up a tree with the tiger looking back. A scene every villager understood. Gharial and mugger crocodile in the shallows, peacocks on the pottery, monkeys in the toys. And now the absence. Small on the ground, enormous in consequence. In all the mature Indus cities, among the hundreds of thousands of animal bones and the thousands of seals and figurines, there is no horse. No credible horse bones from secure mature Harappan contexts. A century of claims has dissolved case by case under modern zoo archaeology. The candidate bones resolving into asses and onagers, no horse on any seal. The carvers who rendered rhinoceros, hide and tiger stripe never once drew the animal. No chariot, no bit, no cheekpiece. The Indus world moved by ox, boat and human foot. The horse simply had not yet come. It was, in that age, a creature of the far northern steppes, whose domestication and chariot were the Bronze Age's northern revolution, still on its way south. Why does a missing animal matter so much? Hold the thread. It ties the whole final act of our story. The later sacred literature of India, the Vedas, composed in these same lands centuries after the cities faded, is saturated with horses, horse sacrifice, horse-drawn chariots of gods and warriors, horses in simile and prayer on nearly every page. A civilization without horses, a successor literature that cannot stop singing about them. That single zoological mismatch is one of the sharpest clues we possess to the great transition awaiting us at the story's end. The question of who the Indus people were, who came after, and how the one world became the other. The horse is absent from the Indus the way a signature is absent from a painting, meaningfully. File it, gently, beside the unread script and the invisible kings. And turn now to the question that outranks them all in fascination. What did these orderly, unarmed, bangle-wearing, drain-building people believe? What gods, if gods at all, kept the great bath filled? Tread carefully now. The fire lowers its voice, because religion is where the Indus silence costs us most, and where the temptation to fill the silence is strongest. No readable prayers, no certain temples. Nothing in any Indus city is unambiguously a house of worship, which is itself remarkable. The civilization contemporary with the great temple states of Sumer and the pyramid cult of Egypt shows no architectural category we can securely call religious except, perhaps, the Great Bath. No named gods, no mythology, no scripture. What we have instead is a scatter of powerful images. and a method. Hold each image up, describe it honestly, note what later India did with similar images, and mark every inference plainly as inference. Done that way, the scatter arranges itself into one of the most tantalizing dossiers in the history of religion. Exhibit 1, the most famous object in Indus archaeology after the dancing girl. A seal from Mohenjo-daro showing a figure seated on a low platform in a posture yoga would later call by name. Legs folded, heels pressed together, arms extended to rest on the knees. Wearing a horned headdress with a plant-like element between the horns, possibly three-faced, surrounded by animals, elephant and tiger to one side, rhinoceros and buffalo to the other, deer beneath the seat. Its first excavator named it Proto-Shiva, seeing in it the later great god in his aspects as Pashupati, lord of beasts, master yogi, the horned and the three-faced. And for a century the identification has been argued, qualified, attacked, and never quite dislodged. Skeptics rightly note that horned seated figures are a broad ancient motif, and that 4,000 years is a long bridge. Yet the posture is exact, the beast lordship is exact, and the possibility that one thread of the subcontinent's greatest god runs back to this square inch of steatite remains, at minimum, respectable, and at maximum, breathtaking. It would make Shiva's the oldest continuous divine iconography on earth. Exhibit 2, humbler and everywhere. The terracotta female figurines. Wide-hipped, ornamented, elaborately fan-headdressed, some smoke blackened in their headdress cups as if oil had burned there. Found in houses, not shrines. A domestic devotion, most scholars read, to female power. Call her mother, call her goddess, call her carefully nothing. Ancestress, perhaps, of the village goddesses who still guard every rural corner of the subcontinent, worshipped at home by women in clay. Exhibit 3, the Pipal Tree. The sacred fig, Ficus religiosa, which the Indus artists rendered with botanical love on pottery and seals, and on one great seal placed at the center of an unmistakable ritual scene. A horned deity standing within the pipal's branches, a worshipper kneeling before it, a giant ram-headed attendant, a row of 7 figures with long braids standing below. The pipal is, of course, the most sacred tree of later India. The tree of the Buddha's enlightenment, the tree no Hindu village will fell. And here it is, receiving what can only be called worship 2,000 years before the Buddha sat beneath it. Exhibits 4 and 5, briefer. At the town of Kalibangan, a row of clay-lined pits with ash, charcoal, and terracotta stelae that the excavators read as fire altars. Ritual fire, if they read rightly, on the very land where Vedic fire ritual would later reign, and everywhere, the water, the bath, the wells, the obsessive bathing floors, cleanliness graded, plausibly, into holiness, the body's purity as spiritual practice, in the lands where ritual bathing would become and remain the daily grammar of religion. Now step back from the exhibits and see what is not there, because the negative space is the strangest testimony of all. No temple estates, no priest-king monuments. The priest-king is 17 centimeters of maybe. No colossal cult statues, no burials with grave goods for divine kings, no war gods brandishing weapons. In the whole corpus, scarcely an image of violence between humans, no sacrificial iconography of the kind that saturates other early religions. If the exhibits mean what they seem to mean, Indus religion lived at a scale later ages would find almost private. A figurine in a wall niche, a fire in a courtyard pit, a tree honoured at the lane's end, a bath at dawn, perhaps a great communal immersion on the citadel at festival. A religion of house, water, tree, and beast, whispering everywhere and shouting nowhere. And the long historical irony, which we will meet in full at journey's end, already gleams. The loud religions of the ancient world, the temple states, the god kings, died with their empires, while the quiet package this dossier sketches. The meditating lord of beasts, the mother of clay, the sacred fig, the holy bath, the reverent bull, reads, item for item, like a first draft of the religious life of 1 billion people alive tonight, guess by guess and marked as guessing. It may be that nothing else the Indus made, not the drains, not the weights, not the cities themselves, proved half so durable as its whispers. Every civilization tells its deepest truths at the graveside, and the Indus keeps its character there to the last, the cemeteries. Best known from Harappa, where several hundred burials have been excavated with modern care, are as orderly, as modest, and as quietly humane as the cities they served. The dead were laid out full length, heads generally northward in rectangular pits, sometimes in wooden coffins, once memorably in a coffin of cedar and rosewood, dressed, to judge by the surviving ornament, much as they had dressed in life. The women in their bangles, shell bangles worn on the left arm, a pattern so consistent it must encode custom we cannot read, beads at the throat, an occasional copper mirror laid by the hand, the men with less. Around them, pottery, water jars, dishes, little pointed cups, provisions, presumably, for whatever journey was believed in, though no text survives to tell us its geography. And that is all. No gold masks, no chariot burials, no retainers put to death to serve a lord below. Nothing, in several hundred graves, that archaeology would flag as royal or even as spectacularly rich. The wealthiest Harappan burial excavated would rank as middling in any Mesopotamian cemetery of the age. The poorest is still a proper, provisioned grave. Death, like the water supply, appears to have been distributed with remarkable equity. One more strand of the pattern we have traced all night. A civilization whose inequalities, whatever they were, it declined to monumentalize. The bones themselves, read by modern bioarchaeology, fill in the census the script withholds. The people of the cities were, by ancient standards, notably healthy. Well-nourished childhoods written in their tooth enamel, long-healed fractures showing care of the injured, teeth worn by stone-ground bread, but, thanks to a low-sugar diet, better than many populations 5,000 years later, lifespans, for those who cleared childhood, reaching into what any pre-modern world would call full age. The drains, in other words, worked. The great killers of dense ancient settlements show more lightly here than the pessimist would predict. Two soberer notes keep the picture honest. In the city's later centuries, the skeletons record rising trouble. More disease markers, more interpersonal injury in some final phase groups at Harappa, the body's own testimony, to which we will return, that the long calm eventually frayed. And strontium isotopes, the chemistry of childhood drinking water locked in tooth enamel, reveal a quietly cosmopolitan population. Many of Harappa's dead grew up somewhere else. Migrants to the city come from the hills or the coast or the villages exactly as people have always come to cities. Several couples in the cemetery pair are local with an outsider. The Indus cities, the teeth say, were destinations, places worth walking to, and the cemetery says the arrivals were buried among everyone else in the same modest order, with the same jars for the same unknown journey. It is not nothing to be a civilization whose graves make archaeologists use the word decent. Now assemble the fact that has been accumulating quietly at the edge of every part tonight, and look at it whole. Because it may be the most extraordinary single fact about the Indus civilization, and one of the most extraordinary in the human record. Across 700 years of urban life, spanning a territory larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, archaeology has found no persuasive evidence of war. Count the missing categories, each of which fills museums elsewhere. No depictions, in thousands of seals, tablets, figurines, and painted pots. Not one battle scene, not one captive, not one triumphant figure standing on a defeated one. The entire iconography of conquest, the default art of every contemporary civilization, is simply absent. No specialized weaponry. The cities yield knives, spear points, arrowheads. The toolkit of hunters and herdsmen. But thin-bladed, unreinforced, many arguably tools. No swords, no maces of rank, no body armor, no shields, nothing like the professionalized arsenals of Sumer or the weapon-crammed warrior graves of the contemporary steppe and later ages, and no warrior burials at all. Not one grave in the excavated record where a man lies proclaimed as a fighter. No destruction layers. Cities burned in war leave unmistakable strata. Ash, toppled walls, unburied dead, arrowheads in doorways. A century of digging across the great sites has found no such horizon in the mature period. The cities were rebuilt over floods and subsidence, never over sackings. No fortresses in the military sense. The famous walls and citadels, examined closely, are platforms against flood and, at most, controls on the movement of goods. Gateways sized for carts and customs, not for repelling armies. Mohenjo-daro's walls face the river's violence, not humanity's. And no evidence of standing forces, no barracks, no arsenals, no rations lists, no readable lists at all, granted, but also none of the physical apparatus that armies deposit. Honesty must now do its rounds, because a claim this large invites wishful thinking, and the fire does not deal in Edens. Absence of evidence is weaker than evidence of absence, though after 2,000 sites, the weakness itself weakens. Skeletal violence is not zero. Individuals with healed head wounds occur, and in the final troubled generations, as we noted, interpersonal injury visibly rises. Indus people were humans, with quarrels, and some quarrels ended badly. Small-scale raiding, village feud, coercion that leaves no archaeological signature. None of this can be excluded, and no serious scholar paints the Indus as a land without conflict. The defensible claim is narrower and, properly seen, more astonishing. Organized warfare as an institution. Armies, conquests, warrior elites, the celebration of military power, which every other early civilization made central to its identity, appears to have played no significant role in Indus life for 7 centuries. The largest civilization of its age ran the longest urban peace in human history, and did not even think it worth depicting. How? The fire can only lay out the hypotheses like the honest guesses they are. Prosperity so general, and trade so integrating, that predation paid worse than participation. An ideology, glimpsed, perhaps, in the baths and the quiet gods, that ranked purity and order above glory. The sheer costliness of war between flood-platformed cities on an open plain, or a political architecture, those invisible councils and guilds with no warlords to feed. Perhaps all of these. Perhaps something we cannot imagine because our own record offers no parallel. What can be said, and should be said plainly at this fire, which has narrated so many magnificent catastrophes? The Indus proves, at civilizational scale and for a very long time, that it was possible. That the association of cities with armies, of civilization with organized violence, which every other chapter of the Bronze Age seems to teach as a law of nature, is not a law of nature. It happened otherwise, once, for 700 years, on the largest stage of the age. And then, because this story spares us tragedy in its middle only to bring a stranger sorrow at its end. The otherwise itself began around 1900 BC to come quietly apart. Decline is usually history's loudest chapter. The sack, the flame, the last king on the wall. The Indus decline is the quietest this fire has ever told, and the telling must honour that. Nothing fell in a day. Rather, over roughly 2 centuries after 1900 BC, the civilization gradually stopped doing the things that had made it itself. As if a great household, over generations, one by one, let its disciplines lapse. Archaeology reads the process in the strata of the cities, and it reads like a slow-motion film of order relaxing. At Mohenjo-daro, the late levels tell it street by street, houses subdivided into warrens, built now of reused and shoddier brick, potters' kilns intruding into once residential quarters, zoning failing, the great streets encroached upon, corners shaved, the grid blurring, and, most eloquent of all, the drains. The sacred drains, silting, breaking, and going unrepaired. The maintenance schedules that had held for 20 generations, abandoned. Here and there, the late inhabitants raising their floors above the failed drainage instead of fixing it, living, literally, atop the decay of their grandparents' standards. The great bath goes out of use and is built over with small chambers. The standardized weights grow scarce in late levels. The seals, the unicorn itself, cease to be cut. The script fades from use, sign by sign, until it vanishes, a civilization forgetting its own signature while still, in a diminished way, alive. And the people begin to leave. The great city's populations dwindle across the 19th and 18th centuries BC. Mohenjo-daro, the metropolis of 35,000, down to squatter clusters camping in the shells of the old houses. Harappa contracting. Tolavira's reservoirs cracking dry, and its fine masonry town shrinking to a village of huts inside the old walls. Not flight, mostly, but dispersal. The urban experiment winding down, family by family, toward the countryside and toward the east, where? Hold this thread. The settlement maps of the following centuries show villages multiplying in the monsoon-fed lands toward the Ganges. The civilization did not die. It de-urbanized. Cities into towns, towns into villages, the great integration dissolving back into the regional cultures from which it had once so suddenly crystallized, until, by around 1700 BC, there were no more Indus cities anywhere. Only a vast, literate no longer, village world that still fired Indus-shaped pots and wore Indus-style bangles and had, within living memory's reach, forgotten how to be what it had been. No sack, no conquest. The lights did not go out. They dimmed, everywhere, gradually, like a city at bedtime. And for 100 years, archaeology has asked the obvious question at the fire's next hour. What does that to a civilization? Who, or what, turned down the lights? For decades, the textbook answer was a war story after all, supplied not by the Indus, but by its excavators' imaginations. And it deserves telling first because its rise and fall is a parable about how history gets written. In the 1940s, the great and theatrical archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler, digging at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, put two findings together with one ancient text and struck a match. The findings: some 36 human skeletons in the late levels of Mohenjo-daro, several in sprawled postures in lanes and houses, seemingly unburied, and the massive walls he had traced at Harappa, which he read as fortifications. The text, the Rig Veda, the oldest scripture of the incoming Indo-Aryan tradition, whose war god Indra bears the epithet Purandara, breaker of forts. Wheeler's verdict rang around the world in a single sentence. Indra, he wrote, stands accused. The cities, he proposed, had been stormed by invading Aryan charioteers. The sprawled skeletons were massacre victims left where they fell, and the Indus civilization had died by the sword in history's first recorded conquest of the subcontinent. It was vivid. It fit the imperial age's assumptions about how civilizations must end. It entered every textbook, and it was wrong in every testable particular. Re-examination over the following decades took it apart bone by bone. The skeletons came from different strata, centuries apart. Not one event. Several were formal burials misread. The bones show almost no weapon injuries. Some show disease. The city has no destruction layer, no arrowhead scatter, no burning horizon. None of war's signatures. The walls, as we have seen, manage floods and commerce, not sieges, and the chronology collapsed the whole plot. The city's decline was substantially complete generations before any plausible date for Indo-Aryan arrival. The invaders, as one archaeologist put it dryly, would have found the forts already empty. Indra was acquitted. And the acquittal matters beyond archaeology, as we shall see, because the invasion story had meanwhile been conscripted into modern politics on all sides. The fire notes it now and will return once. The evidence, held honestly, supports neither a heroic conquest nor its mirror image denials. It supports something slower, wetter, and far stranger. For the true suspects, the modern verdict holds, were not men at all. The first is the river. The second river, the great seasonal system east of the Indus, the Gagga-Hakra, along whose banks remote sensing and survey have mapped an astonishing density of Harappan settlement. By some counts more sites than on the Indus itself, including the metropolis of Rakhigarhi, easternmost of the great cities. That river is today a chain of dry beds and seasonal trickles fading into desert, and the geologists have reconstructed its dying. Fed in the civilization's prime by monsoon catchment, its old identification with a glacier-fed super river has weakened under isotope studies. It was, more likely, a monsoon river magnificent in good ages and mortal in bad ones. It weakened through the very centuries of the decline, its floods failing, its channels retreating downstream, until the cities and villages strung along it stood beside memory instead of water. A civilization built on two river systems lost one of them, not to an enemy, but to hydrology. And behind the river stands the deeper suspect, the one written in cave stalagmites and lake-bed sediments from Oman to the Himalaya, the monsoon itself. The paleoclimate archives converge on a great aridification event around 2200 BC. The same global dry centuries that broke Old Kingdom Egypt and the Akkadian Empire in the same generations, followed by a sustained weakening of the summer monsoon over exactly the Indus centuries of decline. Rains thinner, floods lower, the whole margin of surplus on which cities float shaved year after year. The Indus civilization, on this reading, was not murdered. It was starved of water, slowly, by a planet changing its mind. And its people responded not with collapse, but with the strategy their descendants still know. They followed the rain, generation by generation, eastward toward the Ganges lands where the monsoon still delivered, which is precisely what the settlement maps show. To these two great suspects, the modern case adds accomplices, each with real evidence: disease. The late skeletons of Mohenjo-daro carry markers consistent with epidemic burdens, plausible companions of failing drains and crowding refugees. The sea trade's collapse. Mesopotamia's own crisis in these same centuries dried up the Meluha commerce, and with it the economic keel of the port cities and the prestige economy of the elites, whoever they were. Earthquakes and river shifts on the Indus side, drowning some districts and stranding others. And, finally, the system itself. A civilization integrated as tightly as the Indus. One standard, one script, one economy across 1 million square kilometers. Is magnificent in fair weather and fragile in foul, its very connectedness transmitting every local failure system-wide, like the drains it built. No single blow, a conspiracy of slow pressures. Rain, river, trade, disease, and the brittleness of excellence, against which the quietest civilization on earth did the quiet thing one last time. It did not fall, it dispersed. And in dispersing, it did something no fallen empire manages. It survived its own death, which is the next and gentlest chapter of the whole story. Here the Indus story parts company with every collapse this fire has narrated. When Rome fell, Romans knew it. When Nineveh burned, the world exulted in writing. When the Indus cities emptied, the people simply went on, poorer in cities, unbroken in numbers, and carried the civilization with them in the only luggage that ever really survives: habits. Archaeologists call the following centuries late Harappan and map its regional cultures. The cemetery H-folk at Harappa itself, with their painted burial urns, peacocks carrying, some think, souls skyward. A new eschatology growing in the old soil. The villages of Gujarat, where Harappan craft traditions ran on for centuries. And above all, the great eastward drift into the Ganges-Yamuna duab, where post-urban villages multiply exactly as the monsoon-following model predicts, planting the demographic seed of everything Indian history would later grow there. And through these humbler centuries, watch what persists, because the inventory of survivals is the true census of the civilization. The crops and the kitchen, the wheat and barley, pulse and mustard, cattle and buffalo agriculture, now enriched by the summer rice and millets the adaptable late villages took up. The agrarian package of the subcontinent assembled. The technologies, the potter's kiln, the bead drill carnelian long beads were still being drilled by recognizably Harappan technique in Gujarat 2,000 years later. The craft outliving the civilization by 2 millennia, the shell bangle saw, the brick, even the humble ox cart, rolling unchanged out of the seals and down every village lane in the subcontinent to this day. The measures. The Indus weight standard, astonishingly, resurfaces in the earliest historic Indian coinages and in traditional South Asian jewelers' units. The Ratai seed weight system of later India nests onto the Harappan gram with a fit too neat for coincidence. 5,000 years of continuous metrology, from Mohenjo-daro's chert cubes to the goldsmith scales of a modern bazaar. The body's adornment, the bangle-stacked arm, the dancing girl's arm, which never left the subcontinent's women, the bridal reds, the kohl, the nose stud appearing in late Harappan levels and never afterward departing. And, held gently, as promised, in the tongs of maybe, the whispers, the seated lord of beasts, the mother of clay, the pipal, the bathing, the bull, the religious dossier of part 17, every item of which reappears, transformed and renamed, in the classical religions of India. The scholar's careful summary serves the fire well. The Indus civilization is dead as a state and a script. As a way of life, it is arguably the oldest continuous civilization stream on Earth. Its cities lost, its daily grammar never interrupted. And into that grammar, in the centuries after the cities, there now enters the other great protagonist of the subcontinent's story, arriving not as wheelers fort breakers, but as the evidence actually shows. And the fire must now tell, with all its care, the most delicate chapter of the night, the coming of the Indo-Aryans, the age of the Vedas, and the weaving of the two worlds into one. Let the evidence speak first, in its three independent voices, before any interpretation. Language, Sanskrit, the tongue of the Vedas, is demonstrably a member of the Indo-European family, cousin to Persian, Greek, Latin. Historical linguistics, a science with 2 centuries of rigor behind it, places its arrival in the subcontinent from the northwest, in the centuries around and after 1500 BC. After the cities, the horse and chariot vocabulary it carries is the steppes, and the horse it sings of is, as we saw, the animal the Indus never knew. Archaeology. No invasion horizon exists. No burnt cities, no battle layers. What exists instead is a gradual infiltration signature. New pottery alongside old, steppe-derived material culture appearing in the northwest and blending, pastoral newcomers settling among. Not over. The far more numerous farming descendants of the Indus world. Genetics, the newest voice. Ancient DNA, including, at last, a genome from the Indus city of Rakhigarhi itself, shows the Indus people as a distinctive blend of ancient Iranian plateau-related and indigenous South Asian ancestry, without steppe component, and shows steppe-related ancestry entering the subcontinent's gene pool in the centuries after 1500 BC, mixing. Everywhere, and overwhelmingly by marriage into the existing population. So that virtually every South Asian alive today carries both streams, the Indus farmers and the steppe herders, woven together in the body itself. 3 sciences, 1 picture. Not the conquest of the old story, not the pure indigenous continuity of its rival, but a migration and a marriage. Smaller groups of Indo-Aryan-speaking pastoralists arriving over generations into a post-urban village world that vastly outnumbered them, contributing language, horses, ritual fire, and gods of sky and storm. Receiving land, agriculture, crafts, and the whispers again. Perhaps the deep religion of bath and beast and tree, the 2 strands braiding, over centuries in the Ganges lands, into the classical civilization of India. Sanskrit hymns sung over Harappan fields, the Vedic fire altar raised in villages that still weighed their gold by Mohenjo-daro's gram, the loud religion and the quiet one settling, over 1,000 years, into one household, where, many scholars would say, they live together still. The Vedic gods in the temple liturgy, the Indus inheritance, perhaps, in the temple tank, the seated yogi, the sanctified bull, the village goddess, the morning immersion. And the fire keeps its promise about the modern quarrel with 1 lantern sentence. No more. Because these questions touch the origin stories of living nations, they are contested today with heat the evidence itself does not license. The reader of history serves truth best by holding all 3 sciences steadily and letting no politics of any flavour write the ancient past for it. What the braid meant for our civilization's memory, though, that is the last mystery of the night, and the saddest and strangest, for somewhere in those weaving centuries, the subcontinent forgot the Indus entirely. The greatest cities of the ancient world slipped out of human memory altogether, and how a thing so vast can be so wholly forgotten is a story about memory itself, waiting for us just past the fire's next settling of embers. Pull the camera back for a moment to the whole lamplit earth of 2500 BC and see the Indus in its family portrait. Because it was one of three sisters, three great riverine civilizations alive in the same centuries, aware of one another at the edges, and the comparison is the fastest way to feel what made this one singular. In Egypt, that very generation, the pyramids of Giza were rising, the ultimate expression of the one-man civilization. The entire surplus of a nation channeled through a god-king's person into a single eternal tomb, a land of colossal images, divine monarchy, and writing everywhere proclaiming names. In Mesopotamia, the city-states of Sumer glittered and bled, temple corporations running the economy from ziggurat summits, kings warring city against city and boasting of it on steles, the royal cemetery of Ur burying its lords with slaughtered retinues and harps of gold, writing everywhere, counting barley and singing kings. And on the Indus, the largest of the three by territory and by many estimates by population too. None of it, no pyramid, no ziggurat, no god-king, no war memorial, no named anyone. Instead, the drains, the standard brick, the honest weights, the universal bath, the toy box. Three experiments in what a civilization could be, run simultaneously on three rivers. Egypt organized around eternity, Sumer around divinity and rivalry, the Indus around. The word the evidence keeps whispering. Order, shared, maintained, unglorified order. The three even traded in a chain. Indus carnelian on Sumerian queens, Sumerian silver plausibly in Indus hoards, Dilmun brokering between. And the contact makes the divergence more wonderful. Not less, these peoples knew of each other's ways, and each kept its own. The historian's sobering footnote belongs here too. For a century we have called the trio the cradles of civilization, and told the human story mostly from the two loud sisters, because they wrote us their memoirs. The quiet sister, lacking a readable voice, got a chapter where the others got volumes. Tonight is, in its small way, part of the correction. And the correction matters, because the quiet sister was not the exception to how early civilization worked. She was a third of the sample. Any honest theory of what humans do when they first build cities must now account for the sister who built them without pharaohs, without ziggurats, and without wars, and kept them running longer than either sibling kept its golden age. The cities were the crown, the root was the field. 9 in 10 Indus people, as in every ancient land, were farmers. And the deep clock of the whole civilization was the agricultural year, turning on the great double pulse of river and monsoon. Live through it once, from a village on the floodplain. The year's hinge is high summer. Far to the north, the Himalayan snows are melting, and in June and July the Indus rises, swelling brown and enormous, spreading kilometers wide across the lowlands. The villages have prudently left unbuilt, laying down its annual gift of silt, and almost in the same weeks the sky itself arrives. The monsoon, riding in from the sea in cliffs of cloud, the year's rain delivered in a spendthrift quarter. For the farmer, these weeks are watchfulness. The herds move to high ground, the platforms proving their worth, the flood read like a ledger. Too low, and the winter sowing will be poor. Too high, and the near fields drown late. Then the waters withdraw, September into October, and the true Indus harvest trick begins. For the classic Harappan system, inherited from millennia of planecraft, was flood recession farming. As the river shrinks, it exposes vast beds of fresh, soaked, self-fertilized silt, and into that ready seedbed, needing no plough and little rain, go the winter crops. The rabi sowing, wheat and barley above all, with lentil, chickpea, field pea, mustard, and linseed among them. The cool, dry winter grows them. Spring ripens them. March and April bring the great harvest, the sickles of chert and copper flashing, the ox carts groaning cityward, the granary quarters thumping with the husking pestles we heard at Harappa. And the mature civilization, agronomists have shown, ran a second file as well, summer crops, kharif. sown to meet the monsoon itself. Sesame here from the beginning, cotton the great cash fibre, and, spreading through the later centuries, especially eastward, the monsoon grains, rice and the hardy millets. The double cropping flexibility that would later cushion the migrations of the decline. Around the calendar's rim, the constants, the zebu teams ploughing the drier fields, the wells creaking for the garden plots, melons, dates, grapes in the west, the buffalo in the village tank, the flood season boat traffic, when the drowned plain becomes a highway and the year's heavy freight moves by water. It was, at its best, one of the most secure subsistence systems of the ancient world: 2 rivers, 2 rains, 2 sowings, and the world's most reliable fertilizer delivered annually to the doorstep. And its security is the quiet explanation beneath everything the fire has admired tonight. The 700 years of peace, the cities without granary kings rationing scarcity, the surplus poured into drains and beads instead of walls, all of it floated on the deep, dependable rhythm of flood and rain. And when at the end, the rhythm itself faltered, the rains thinning, the second river failing the civilization did not lose a war or a dynasty, it lost its clock. Everything else followed. History's usual sources, king lists, war records, law codes, are written almost entirely by and about men. The Indus, having none of them, offers a rare inversion, its richest human evidence. Figurines, ornament, burials, house plans, craft debris. Speaks as much of women as of men, and sometimes more. And though the mute record forbids biography, it permits a portrait, and the portrait is worth an hour. Begin where the evidence is loudest, the figurines. Thousands of terracotta women modelled in the households of every city. Elaborate fan-shaped headdresses, necklaces stacked, belts, the famous panniered coiffures sometimes cupped for oil flame. Some cradle infants, some knead or grind, some stand in frontal assurance. Whether each is goddess, votive, doll, or ancestress. And the truthful answer is surely all of these, in different hands. The aggregate says one plain thing. The female image stood at the center of Indus domestic imagination, made constantly, kept everywhere, in a way with no male equivalent in the corpus. Add the ornament economy, the bangle industries, shell, faience, stoneware, the whole graded system. Existed overwhelmingly to adorn women's arms. The cemetery data confirm the wearing and that left arm rule, custom fossilized. The cosmetics, the mirrors, the jewelry hoards. A very large fraction of the civilization's craft output, which is to say of its economy, served the presentation of women. And where a society spends, a society values. The burials add their quiet testimony. Women's graves are provisioned fully as men's. No widow poverty in death, no harem anonymity. One famous Harappan pairing lays a man and woman together in a single grave, turned toward each other. Read what one will, across 4,000 years, into that. The work, grinding and cooking, left their marks on female skeletons, the kneeling labor facets on toe and knee bones, but so, tellingly, do the crafts. Spinning halls cluster in domestic contexts, and the textile industry, cotton's whole world-changing chain from boll to bolt, ran in significant part through women's hands, as it did in every ancient economy. Potting, bead finishing, basketry likewise. And at the top of the imagination, the whispers once more. If the horned lord of beasts is the dossier's male pole, its female pole. The clay mothers in every house, and their 10,000-year lineage running back to Mehrgar's figurines and forward, plausibly, to the village goddesses of living India, is older, commoner, and more continuous. None of this makes the Indus a matriarchy. The fire does not deal in Edens, and the invisible rulers, if rulers there were, are as likely to have been men as anywhere. The seal's owners, the weights enforcers, we simply cannot sex. But the balance of what survives is unlike its contemporaries. No other Bronze Age civilizations remains give women so central a visual and material presence, and none gives men so modest a one. No warrior graves, no king images, no boasting steles. The loudest male in the entire Indus record is a 17-centimeter man with his eyes half closed. In the quietest civilization, the visible half of humanity is, for once in the ancient world, the other half. One more system deserves its hour before we spend our last evening in the city, because it carried everything else: transport. The arteries by which a civilization spread across 1,000,000 square kilometers held itself together without, so far as we know, a single paved highway or a single horse. The trunk routes were the rivers themselves. The Indus and its 5 Punjab tributaries, plus the Eastern River, made a natural web of navigable water connecting the wheatlands to the cities and the cities to the sea, and for half the year. Above all in the flood months, when the plain itself became a shallow sea. Bulk freight moved as it always moves where water allows, by boat at a tiny fraction of land carriage cost. The boats themselves survive only in pictures and models, but the pictures are good. The seals and a famous terracotta amulet show flat-bottomed rivercraft with high-curved prow and stern. The profile, boat historians note with pleasure, of the houseboats and river barges working the Indus within living memory, with a deckhouse amidships, steering oars, and on one tablet a pair of birds, the land-finding pilots of the deep-water runs. Flat bottoms for the shifting sandbars, high ends for the flood chop, reed construction plausibly for the lighter craft, and timber for the freighters. And at Lothal, if its excavator read the basin rightly, the world's oldest fitted dock to receive them. Overland, the web was completed by the ox cart, the solid-wheeled, zebu-drawn workhorse, whose terracotta models are so numerous and so exact down to removable sideboards for different cargoes that the engineers have reconstructed the fleet. Axle gauges standardized, naturally. The ruts worn into Harappan street thresholds match cart widths across the civilization, one more entry in the ledger of quiet uniformity. And the routes marked by the caravan towns. Kalibangan and the Riverline stations spacing the eastern artery a day's haul apart, the western Piedmont road threading toward the passes and the highland resource zones. Lapis and tin and copper coming down, grain and cloth and beads going up, and the desolate coastal road west, anchored by that lonely brick outpost at Sutkagandur, where some Harappan customs officer watched the empty Makran, shore for sails from the Gulf. No milestones, no royal road builder's boasts. Of course not. This civilization signed nothing. Just the physical fact, recoverable by survey. A continent-scale circulation system of rivers, carts, and coasting ships, moving grain, ore, cloth, beads, and ideas on schedules the flood calendar set for 700 years, with such reliability that a single weight standard could hold from the mountains to the sea. Every civilization is, underneath everything, its transport map. The Indus map is water and oxen, patient, silent, seasonal, and sufficient. And it explains one last time why the horse and chariot world that came later felt like, and genetically was, a different arrival. The Indus moved at the speed of the river and the Zebus walk, and for 7 centuries, nothing on earth needed to move faster. The fire has earned this. Before the forgetting and the goodbyes, let us assemble everything the night has gathered. The bricks and beads and bones, the drains and dice and whispers, into one continuous hour of lived time. An ordinary evening, late spring, around 2450 BC, in the great city by the river. Nothing will happen. That is the point. It was the civilization's masterpiece. The heat is going out of the day. On the river, the last freight of the evening comes up the channel. A high-prowed barge riding low with Gujarati shell and coastal saltfish, its boatman poling the slack water, a boy at the prow whistling to the gulls. At the landing, porters and carts. A wharf clerk presses a unicorn seal into a soft clay tag and cords it to a bale. Somewhere in that little act, a name we will never read is being written. Up the ramp, through the gate where an official glances at the load, no soldiers, there have never, in the memory of anyone's grandmother, needed to be soldiers, and into the streets. The main avenue runs north, straight as a sighting line. Between plain brick walls the sunset is turning the colour of bread crust. The street is filling with the evening's traffic. Herd boys bringing the household buffalo up from the tanks, water carriers, a bead merchant's laden donkey, Girls with jars balanced heading for the corner well, where the queue is the neighborhood's parliament. The well-coping ropes have worn their grooves a finger deep. 4 generations of evening gossip recorded in stone. Down a side lane, the workshops are banking their fires. The potter stacking tomorrow's kiln. The bangle maker's apprentice sweeping faience dust. The coppersmith's last hammer tap spacing out like a slowing heart. From the courtyards, the day's second sound change. The querns going quiet, the cooking fires waking, wheat smoke and cumin and river fish on the air. In 100 bathing rooms, the day is being rinsed off. Jar water sluicing over shoulders, chasing down the sloped floors, out through the wall pipes, into the lane drains, joining the city's underground murmur, the buried river of order running beneath everyone's feet toward the fields. A municipal worker on the main street lifts an inspection slab for a last look. Silt trap fine, and lets it clap home. The day's most important civic act, and nobody notices, which is its glory. Dusk now. On the rooftops, the beds are coming out, and the smoke of the hearths stands in straight blue columns over 10,000 suppers. Flatbread and lentils, curd, river fish, dates from the western gardens. In one courtyard, a grandmother sets a pinch of the meal before the little clay lady in the wall niche. An act her line has performed since before the city existed and will perform, renamed long after it. Children own the lanes in the last light, a pull toy ram rattling over the bricks with the dog in delighted pursuit. A knot of players crouched over a dice game by a doorway lamp, the cubes clicking. Somewhere an 11-year-old is learning the lesson about sixes that the subcontinent's epics will still be teaching kings 1,000 years hence. Up on the citadel, the great pool lies filled and still, doubling the first stars. Whatever tomorrow's rite may be, tonight the water simply waits, and the watchman on the platform can see the whole city below him. The grid dissolving into lamplight, the river a last band of pewter to the west, the dark plain beyond scattered with the cooking fires of villages all the way to the horizon, every one of them tied to this street grid by cart track and weight standard, and the same 4:2:1, brick. No palace lamp burns above any other, no temple horn calls, no wall is watched for enemies, because there are none in living memory. Just the city, breathing, water below it, water above it, order all through it. 35,000 people ending the day in reasonable comfort, reasonable safety, and reasonable dignity, on an evening so ordinary that 4,500 of its like passed without one of them imagining it could ever be otherwise, or ever be forgotten. Hold the picture a moment, complete. Then let the lamps go out one by one, as they did. Because the next part of the story is the strangest of all. The part where all of this, everything you have just seen, vanishes not only from the earth, but from the mind of humankind. Civilizations die twice, once in the world and once in memory. And the second death is usually partial. Rome fell and was never forgotten for a day. Egypt's gods went silent, but the pyramids stood in full view, demanding legend. Even drowned Sumer left its name in scripture and its king lists in later archives. The Indus alone, of all the great civilizations, died the second death completely. And the fire's last mystery is how such total forgetting is even possible. The mechanics, laid out one by one, almost suffice. The script died with the cities, and unread writing preserves nothing. Within a few generations of the last seal cutter, there was no one alive who could have told a child what the signs on grandfather's amulet said. The civilization's entire self-description became decoration. The successor culture was oral. The Vedic world committed its memory to recited verse, perfected over centuries, magnificent and selective. It remembered its own hymns, syllable perfect for 3,000 years, and had no reason to memorialize the mounds of strangers. Where the Rig Veda's poets do glance at ruins, they see only nameless fallen places, already anonymous. The building material betrayed its makers. Brick, unlike stone, is recyclable. Every abandoned Indus city became the region's quarry, unbuilt house by house into the villages around it. The railway contractors of the 1850s were merely the last and largest customers of a demolition 4,000 years old. A pyramid cannot be carried away in baskets. A brick metropolis can, and was. The rivers moved. Settlements lost their geographic logic when the water left, and the eastern river's very existence faded into a poet's memory of a lost sacred stream. The silt and the dust did the rest, rounding the stumps of cities into hills. The climate ate every written perishable, and the deep time did what deep time does. 1,500 years. The gap between the last Indus town and the first historic Indian kingdoms is as long as the gap between the Roman Empire and us. Imagine Rome with no stone, no surviving script, no church, no legend, and 15 centuries of monsoons. And yet the mechanics leave a remainder, which is the gentlest part of the whole telling. Things were remembered. Only the rememberers did not know it. The village that fired its pots in the old shapes was remembering. The bride's arm stacked with bangles was remembering. The goldsmith's rut-eye weights, nesting perfectly on Mohenjo-daro's gram, remembered 5,000 years without a day's interruption. The farmer sowing the flood line, the ox cart's axle gauge, the morning immersion in the river, the pipal spared at the field's edge, the clay goddess in the niche, the seated ascetic mastering his breath. Each, if the night's careful maybes hold, a memory wearing work clothes, handed down by people who had lost the story but kept the practice. That is the strange consolation of the Indus forgetting. The civilization was not lost like a ship, all hands. It was dissolved like a lump of salt in the subcontinent's water, invisible thereafter and present in every taste. History forgot the name, the hands and the mornings forgot nothing. And when, after 4,000 years, the diggers finally came with their trowels and their questions, the discovery that stunned the world was not, in the deepest sense, an encounter with the alien. It was a civilization being introduced to its own grandmother, which is exactly, as the fire's next hour will tell, how the modern subcontinent received the news. The fire has spent its night, as archaeology spent its first century in the great cities. But the cities were the visible 5%. The Indus civilization was, in its body, a world of villages and small towns, well over 1,000 mapped and multiplying with every survey season, and no portrait is honest that leaves them in the dark. Step into one. A farming hamlet of a few dozen households on the eastern river, a day's cart from the nearest town. The first surprise is how unhumble it is. The lanes, short as they are, run straight and drain properly. The houses, mud brick here rather than fired, still follow the courtyard plan. The well is brick-lined in the standard wedge-shaped brick. The potsherds underfoot carry the same black-on-red peacocks and pipal leaves as a city market's. And in the headman's house, or the shrines, or the storehouses, the usual honest shrug, sits a set of chert weights on the standard for the settling of the village's grain accounts. The civilization, in other words, did not thin out toward its edges the way empires do, with metropolitan splendor grading into provincial squalor. Its standards were remarkably flat. The same order, scaled down, all the way to the smallest node. And the node specialized, which is the second surprise. Survey has revealed a countryside organized like a dispersed factory. Villages of flint knappers beside the chert ridges, turning out the standardized blades the whole civilization used. Coastal hamlets given over wholly to shell working, ankle-deep in sawn conch. The carnelian villages of Gujarat near the agate sources, drilling beads for queens they would never see. Kiln towns making brick and stoneware bangles. Salt and dried fish stations on the shores. Pastoral camps moving the herds between the settled zones and knitting them together with wool, dairy, and news. Each fed its specialty into the river and cart web we mapped, and drew from it grain, cloth, copper, and the shared culture whose fingerprints. The weights, the bricks, the bangles, the little clay mothers, turn up as faithfully in a 10-house hamlet as in Mohenjo-daro. Historians of other ancient economies would call this integration and assume an empire enforcing it. Here, as ever, no enforcer shows himself, just the network, humming. Perhaps that is the truest single image of the Indus the whole night offers. Not the great city, magnificent as it was, but the web itself. 1 million square kilometers of villages, towns, camps, and cities, joined by rivers, oxen, standards, and habits into one vast, quiet, headless cooperation. the largest thing of its age on Earth and the least commanded. The story of how we know did not end with Marshall's 1924 headline. It accelerated. And the rediscovery's own second century deserves the fire's telling, because it has quietly transformed almost every number in tonight's story. First came the great mid-century upheaval that split the civilization's modern custodians. The partition of 1947 drew a border straight through the Indus world. Mohenjo-daro and Harappa to the new Pakistan, the eastern river country to India. And even the artifacts were divided, the dancing girl to Delhi, the priest king to Karachi, the great necklaces literally unstrung and shared bead by bead. Yet the division, whatever its sorrows, doubled the searching. India, holding few of the famous cities, surveyed its side of the line, and found the civilization was much bigger than anyone had dreamed. Hundreds upon hundreds of sites along the dry eastern river and down through Gujarat. Kalibangan with its fire altars and its ploughed field fossilized under the town. Lothal and its basin. Dholavira rising in the salt marsh. And at last Rakhigarhi in Haryana, sprawling so wide that it now contends with Mohenjo-daro for the title of largest Indus city of all. Still almost entirely unexcavated, a metropolis holding its breath under the mustard fields. Pakistan's side answered with deep sequences at Harappa, the long American-Pakistani excavations that gave us the craft quarters, the cemetery science, the workshop chronologies of tonight, with Mehrgarh pushing the roots back to 7000 BC and with survey along the Indus corridor. Then the tools changed. Radiocarbon dating replaced guesswork chronologies and pinned the civilization's true dates. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar traced the ghost of the lost eastern river across 2 nations' deserts and found the buried streets of unexcavated mounds. Isotope chemistry opened the teeth of the dead and read their childhood geographies. Archaeobotany sieved the kitchen middens into tonight's menus. Ancient DNA, at terrible technical odds in that climate, finally yielded the Rakhigarhi genome, and computers took up the script, confirming its language-like order while, so far, opening nothing. The sum of the second century is a paradox the fire relishes. We now know vastly more about the Indus than Marshall's generation, and the proportion of the unknown has grown. For of the 2,000-plus sites now mapped, something like 90% have never felt a trowel. Of Mohenjo-daro itself, most remains unexcavated deliberately. The exposed ruins are being eaten alive by waterlogged salt rising through the ancient brick, and modern policy holds that the best archive is the earth itself. Better to leave the pages closed than open them to dissolve. Rakhigarhi and Ganweriwala, 2 of the 5 great cities, are effectively unread books lying on the table. Somewhere in that unexcavated 90%. Statistically, almost certainly, lie the archives that would answer tonight's every question. The long texts, the bilingual merchant's tablet, the building that finally says palace or says council house. The Indus is not a closed case. It is the largest open case in world archaeology, and its greatest discoveries are, in all likelihood, still in the ground, which lends this night's every careful, maybe its quiet excitement. We have been describing not a finished portrait, but a photograph still developing. What is it like to stand there now? Mohenjo-daro today is a UNESCO World Heritage Site on the west bank of the living Indus. The excavated quarters lie open under the enormous Sindhi sky, the lanes walkable, the well shafts standing like chimneys where the ground around them was dug away, the great bath's brick still crisply stepped, the later Buddhist stupa, the mound that lured the first diggers, still crowns the citadel, a monument of one lost age sitting on another. And in the small site museum, the seals and weights and toys lie in their cases a few hundred meters from the houses that held them. Pilgrims of a modern kind come. Schoolchildren, scholars, travellers who stand in the lanes at dusk and feel exactly what tonight's journey has felt. But the visit carries an ache. The guidebooks state plainly, the city, having survived 4,000 years buried, is in danger now that it is found. The enemy is its old ally, water. The irrigated modern plain has lifted the water table, and capillary salt rises through the ancient brick, blooming white on the walls and crumbling them grain by grain. Conservators fight it with mud-slurry coats and drainage, a strange full circle in which the civilization of perfect drainage now depends on ours, and the sky joined in living memory. The catastrophic monsoon floods of 2022 drowned the surrounding country and damaged the site itself. 4 millennia of survival, tested by the same force that built and unbuilt the civilization. Harappa lies greener and sparser, its brick long since railway ballast, its museum guarding what the contractors missed. Tolovira, inscribed by UNESCO in 2021, bakes in the white Ran, its reservoirs dry monuments to hoarded rain. Lothal's basin holds monsoon puddles where the tide once lifted keels, and Rakhigarhi's mounds rise from Haryana villages whose houses stand, in places, directly on the metropolis, laundry drying above the unread archives. Between 2 nations, in 6 museums and 100 storerooms, under mustard fields and floodwater, the civilization waits, cared for, contested, eroding, enduring, heritage in the exact, difficult, human sense of the word. Here is a turn no one at Marshall's press desk in 1924 could have foreseen. A century on, the Indus civilization has acquired a modern readership beyond archaeology. City planners, water engineers, sustainability theorists, who study it not as a curiosity but as a case, the longest-running urban experiment on record, examined for results. Their findings, offered at the fire without utopian varnish, make a striking syllabus. On water, a civilization that treated water as the first civic question, harvesting it at Dolavira, distributing it by 700 wells, disposing of it by engineered drains, honouring it on the citadel. Sustained dense cities in a monsoon land for 7 centuries. Modern South Asian cities battling the same hydrology have, in so many words, commissioned studies of Dolavira's reservoirs. On infrastructure before monument, the Indus put its surplus underground and into standards, and its cities outlasted, in continuous habitability, every palace-centered rival of their age. The planner's term of art is investment in the unglamorous, and the Indus is its founding case study. On standardization, 1 brick ratio, 1 weight system, 1 cart gauge across a subcontinent. Friction removed from a whole economy without, apparently, an empire to impose it. The Bronze Age's demonstration that shared standards are a form of wealth. On equity as durability. Cities where sanitation, water, and decent housing reached effectively everyone proved socially stable for 20 generations. The archaeologist's cautious phrasing is that low visible inequality correlates, in this one grand case, with low visible conflict. The moderns may draw their own morals. And on the limit, for the syllabus is honest. The same integration that made the system efficient made it brittle when the climate turned. The Indus is also the founding case study in what a 2-century drying trend does to a hydraulic civilization, and it is read today with professional unease by people modelling the futures of the very same river basins where hundreds of millions now live on the descendants of those floods and those monsoons. The oldest planned cities on Earth, speaking to the newest, build for water first. Bury your best work. Standardize, include everyone, and watch the rain. Because the rain, on the longest record we possess, is the true sovereign, and it does not negotiate. Every journey this fire takes ends by gathering what was learned. This one, uniquely, must also gather what was not. For the Indus is the civilization whose mysteries are load-bearing, and listing them honestly is not an admission of failure, but the truest map of the terrain. So, in the night's last inventory, the great open questions, each with its state of play. Who governed? The invisible state problem. Councils, guilds, priesthoods, rotating elites, an ideology strong as law. Every model has advocates, none has a palace. The answer most likely sleeps in the unexcavated 90%. What does the script say? 400 signs, 5-sign average texts, no bilingual, no proven daughter language. Decipherment awaits either a lucky spade or a long text, and would, in an afternoon, rewrite this entire night. What language did they speak? Dravidian. Lost, isolate, something else. The Brahwi pocket and the fish sign arguments keep Dravidian the frontrunner, unproven. What was the religion, really? The dossier of Bath, Beast Lord, Mother, Tree, and Fire is suggestive and unconfirmed. One readable hymn would settle what a century of iconography cannot. Why the unicorn? The commonest emblem of the civilization, meaning unknown, clan, cult, corporation, god. How did the integration of 2600 BC happen so fast? A merchant revolution? A religious movement? A system's threshold crossed? Prehistory's quietest Big Bang? Was the peace real? And how was it kept? The record says yes, and does not say how. The mechanism, whatever it was, would be worth more to the modern world than every bead in every museum. What exactly ended it? The monsoon and river verdict leads, with the shares of trade collapse, disease, and internal fraying still being argued sediment core by sediment core. What is inside Rakhigarhi and Ganweriwala? Two of the 5 great cities, essentially unopened, the discipline's 2 sealed envelopes. And the meta-question beneath them all, the one this night has circled since the railway ballast. How should we tell the story of a people who cannot yet speak for themselves? Tonight's answer has been carefully. Evidence first, maybes flagged, silence respected as silence rather than filled with our preferences, and with the standing hope, real and not rhetorical, that some season's digging will let a future night at this fire retell the whole story in the Indus people's own words and discover, with joy, everything we got wrong. And so to the drawing together as the embers settle. The handful of deep themes this quietest of civilizations has been teaching all night beneath its silence. The first, order can be a monument. The Indus built no pyramids because it was building something harder, a working, general, maintained order. Clean water for everyone, honest weights for every market, streets that drained and cities that endured. The pyramid asks to be admired. The drain asks only to work, and the drain this civilization wages across 4 millennia is the higher art. Ask of any society, ask of your own, where the surplus goes, into the visible glory of the few, or the invisible comfort of the many. The Indus is history's great vote for the second answer, and its cities outlived every rival's golden age. The second, greatness does not require a name. Every other early civilization is a roll call. Khufu, Sargon, Gilgamesh. The Indus achieved as much, arguably more, and left not one name, one face, one tomb of a great man. Whatever pride built Mohenjo-daro was a pride that did not need to sign itself, and the anonymous excellence of the 421 brick stands as history's standing question to every culture of celebrated individuals. How much of what we call greatness is the deed, and how much the advertising? The third, peace is not the absence of history. 700 years without organized war produced no epics, and produced, instead, the toys, the bangles, the dice, the well-fed skeletons, the ordinary evenings, the largest body of evidence for peaceable human flourishing the ancient world possesses. History's page stays blank where life goes well. The Indus teaches the reader of history to see the blankness as an achievement, perhaps the achievement, and to distrust any telling of the human story that only counts what burned. The fourth, what endures is what is practiced, not what is proclaimed. The civilization's proclamations, script, seals, unicorn, died utterly. Its practices, the crops, the crafts, the weights, the bangles, the bath, the whispered gods, never stopped for a single generation and run on tonight in a billion lives. Empires transmit themselves by memory, and memory fails. The Indus transmitted itself by habit, and habit held. Teach the hands, this story says, and you may outlive the forgetting of your name by 5,000 years. And the fifth, the quietest, water writes the contract. The Indus rose on the flood and the monsoon, ordered its cities around water's management, plausibly worshipped at water's edge, and dissolved when the water withdrew its signature. It is the oldest full-length demonstration of the truth the newest sciences keep reproving, that every civilization is a negotiation with its rain, holding exactly as long as the rain holds. Humility before that contract is the beginning of civic wisdom. And the people who understood it best built their greatest shrine as a pool of still water, high above the streets, doubling the stars. One more journey before the night's gathering. The longest an Indus life could make, reconstructed step by careful step from the ceilings and the shipwreckless sea lanes, the customs weights and the cuneiform receipts. Come aboard at Lothal in the first cool weeks after the monsoon with a merchant we may not name, no one can, but whose cargo we know to the bead. The ship has wintered on the mud. Now the basin fills on the spring tide, the gate timbers groan, and she floats. High-prowed, cabin amidships, her hold packed against the voyage, chests of long carnelian beads, each one a season of some driller's life, sawn ivory, bales of madder red cotton sealed with the unicorn tags, jars of ghee and sesame oil, a crate of blue faience bangles, and, caged aft to the crew's amusement, peacocks. Meluha's living jewelry, bound for a Sumerian courtyard. The pilot birds ride in their basket by the steering oars, down the gulf on the ebb and west along the coasts. First the familiar shores of Gujarat, then the long brown desolation of Makran, where the ship waters at the lonely brick station of Sutkagan Dor and the crew sacrifices. To what god the fire admits once more, we do not know. For the crossing ahead, past the straits where the gulf narrows, the world changes tongue. At Magan, the ship takes on copper ingots against silver. At Dilmun, sweet-watered, palm-shaded, the Bronze Age's free port. The merchant pays the island's dues weighed on his own chert cubes, for Dilmun keeps Indus standard and shares news with Melohan captains homeward bound. The river cities are buying, the roads are quiet, the monsoon came fair. Then the last leg, up the dredged channels into Sumer, where the world's other civilization stands on its levees. Ziggurats, wharf cranes, the smoke of 10,000 suppers that eat barley instead of wheat. And at the quay of the clerks come down with their damp tablets and their styluses, and our merchant's cargo passes, item by item, into writing we can read. Carnelian of Meluha, ivory of Meluha, received. In the bazaar he is a known kind of stranger. Men of Meluha have a village downriver. An interpreter hangs his seal at the customs house, and for a month he trades. The beads go to a temple factor for a queen's parure, the cotton and the peacocks to a palace steward. The copper is sold onward at the margin that makes the whole voyage, and the silver. Suma's one irresistible export is weighed out in coils and hidden in the ballast. What does he see, our quiet man from the drained and orderly streets, walking a Sumerian evening? The god-king's statues, the war stels, the slave gangs on the levee, the beggars, the temple feeds. The sources are silent. The fire permits itself one guess only, that he notices the smells. Then the wind turns with the season, and the ship runs east on the winter monsoon. Dilmun, Magan, the long Makran shore, the gulf opening, until on some blue morning the masthead boy sights the low green line of home, and the pilot bird, released, flies straight. And the basin gate at Lothal swallows the hull, and the peafowl money is counted on honest stones, and a man who has seen the other world sits down that night in his courtyard to flatbread and dal under the little clay goddess, entirely unaware, as the fire's travellers always are, that he has just enacted the whole meaning of his civilization, order, carried quietly across the edge of the earth and brought safely home. One last descent, straight down. For Mohenjo-daro is not one city, but a stack of them, and its stratigraphy is the civilization's autobiography written in section. The excavator's trenches read like tree rings, city built upon city upon city. At least 9 major building phases by the classic count, and the true bottom never reached, for the founders' levels lie below the modern water table, drowned by the very silt rise that lifted the plain. The first Mohenjo-daro sleeps in the groundwater, unexcavated and perhaps unexcavatable, a city older than the oldest city we can see. Read upward through the stack and the biography unfolds. The deepest reachable levels show the plan already whole. Grid, drains, platforms, standard brick, from the beginning. The order was not evolved on the site, but arrived, full-grown, in that mysterious integration of 2600 BC. Mohenjo-daro was born planned. Then the long, prosperous strata, phase on phase, floors raised as the plain silted, walls rebuilt on old footings. Property lines holding steady for centuries, a continuity of tenure that implies deeds, inheritance, law in some register we cannot read. The drains relaid, always relaid, each generation's maintenance visible as a fresh course of brick on its grandfather's channel. Flood horizons, bands of clean river silt sealing whole quarters, after each of which the city simply rises again, one platform higher, the same streets on the same lines, catastrophe absorbed as routine 7 times and more. And then the top of the stack, which we have already walked in sorrow, the late levels. The subdivided houses, the shoddy brick, the kilns in the courtyards, the drains at last unrepaired. Order relaxing stratum by stratum until the final squatter floors sit thin and improvised on the ruins of magnificence. And above them, nothing but wind-laid dust for 2,000 years. And then, strangest crown of all, the Buddhist stupa of a much later age, raised by monks who chose the great mound for its holy prominence without any idea. How could they have? That they were building their shrine on the roof of the greatest city of the ancient world. 9 cities, a drowned founder, 7 floods survived, 1 slow fading, 20 centuries of silence, and a monastery on top. No monument the Indus could have carved would say as much as the mound says by simply being what it is. Time made solid, order's whole life cycle from birth to burial preserved in 40 feet of brick and dust. The local name, it turns out, was exact all along, Mound of the Dead. But the dead of Mohenjo-daro are not bodies. They are cities, stacked like sleepers. And tonight, for one night at this fire, the whole stack has been awake. One discovery remains that the fire has saved deliberately, because nothing else so vividly proves the civilization's reach, or so charmingly keeps its character at maximum distance from home. In the late 1970s, French archaeologists surveying the plain of the Amu Darya, the Oxus. In far northeastern Afghanistan, 1,000 kilometers overland from Mohenjo-daro across the whole grain of the Hindu Kush, uncovered a small settlement that made no local sense at all. The pottery was Indus, black on red with the pipal leaves. The bricks were Indus, fired to the sacred 421. There were Indus seals. A rhinoceros, carved by a hand trained in the lowland style, in a land that never saw a rhinoceros. Indus waits on the standard. Indus drains under the little lanes. Even the bones of the zebu walked up through the passes. The site is called Shortagai, and it is exactly what it appears to be. A colony, a transplanted Indus village, planted in the 3rd millennium BC at the farthest edge of the known world, for one legible reason. It sits beside the river routes down from Badakhshan, the mountain province that held then, as it holds now, the only great source of lapis lazuli on earth. The blue stone that Egypt buried with pharaohs and Sumer inlaid into temple lyres, all of it, every carat in every royal tomb of the Bronze Age Near East, mined within reach of this one Afghan valley. The Indus network, rather than buy the blue at middlemen's prices, had gone to the source: families. The household pottery and the children's toys say families, not a garrison. Had packed the standards of their civilization onto pack oxen, crossed the highest passes of the age, and set up the whole kit beside the lapis roads, the farthest flung fingertip of the quiet web, drilling beads and farming its little irrigated fields under the Afghan sky, generations deep. And Shortagai is only the boldest of the frontier hands. Westward, the Makran coast station at Sutkegandur watched the sea road to the Gulf. The highland valleys of Baluchistan held trading towns where Indus and mountain cultures mixed pottery and marriages. The Gulf itself, as we sailed it, kept Indus weights at Dilmun and Indus sealings in Omani copper towns, and northward the passes fed down the tin and gold and horses not yet of the interior. No fortresses anchor any of it, no colonial governor's palace, no punitive inscriptions. The network expanded the way it did everything, by settling, standardizing, and trading, its only visible instruments the brick ratio and the honest cube. Empires of the later world would plant their flags at such distances. The Indus planted its plumbing 1,000 kilometers from home, over the roof of the world, beside the bluest mines on earth. A right-angled lane, a covered drain, and a rhinoceros seal. The quiet sister's idea of a frontier, and as fitting a last image of her working life as the whole record affords. And with the farthest fingertip touched, the circle is complete. Mountains to sea, village to metropolis, kiln to grave, dawn to dusk. It is time to gather the whole story, once, slowly, the way the flood gathers the year's waters, and then to let the river carry it, and us, into the night's last words. So let the whole of it flow past once more. The entire story, told once through, from the first seed to the last silence, and out the other side. It begins 9,000 years ago at the foot of the Western Mountains, at Mehrgar by the Bolan Pass. Wheat and barley in little fields, the zebu tamed, cotton coaxed into the world's service, beads on farm wives, a craftsman drilling a neighbour's tooth. The skills flow downhill over 4,000 patient years. Brick, wheel, boat, bead. Villages taking root on the great double river plain of the Indus and the Eastern Stream, learning the flood, raising the platforms. And then, around 2600 BC, the quiet Big Bang. Within a century, the whole vast watershed integrates. Cities founded to master plans, the script standardized, the weights standardized, the brick fired everywhere to 421, and the mature civilization stands complete, the largest on earth, from the Himalayan foothills to the Arabian Sea. We walked its capital in the evening light, Mohenjo-daro on its flood-proof platforms. The gridded streets, the courtyard houses with their bathing floors and wells, the buried rivers of the drains with their manholes and silt traps, and on the citadel, where other worlds raised palaces, the Great Bath, still water, perfectly sealed, doubling the stars. We visited the sisters, robbed Harappa thumping with husking pestles, Tolovira hoarding the desert's rain in stone reservoirs beneath the world's oldest signboard, Lothal opening its brick basin to the tide. We sailed with Meluha's merchants to Dilmun and where cuneiform clerks wrote the only name of this people we can read, and queens were buried in Gujarati carnelian. We watched the drill masters spend years on a single bead, met the dancing girl's cheek and the priest king's trance, weighed the world on honest chert cubes that matched from the mountains to the sea, and found, at the centre of all this order, the great absence, no palace, no king, no name, power as plumbing, government invisible. We faced the 400 signs no one can read, and the unicorn no one can explain, walked the lanes at morning among flatbread and bangles and the tap of the bead saws, knelt in the toy box civilization among nodding bulls and pull carts and dice, met the animals and marked the horse's meaningful absence, opened the dossier of the quiet gods, the seated lord of beasts, the clay mothers, the pipal, the fire pits, the holy water. Every item flagged every maybe 5,000 years long. We sat with the decent dead in their modest, equal graves, counted 700 years without a war story, and said plainly what that counting means. And then we watched the lights dim, the monsoon weakening after 2200 BC, the eastern river failing, the drains going unrepaired, the script fading sign by sign, the cities dissolving family by family into the countryside and eastward toward the rains. No sack, no conquest, Indra acquitted. A civilization starved of water, dispersing in good order one last time. We followed the survivors into the long afterlife, the crafts and crops and weights and bangles that never stopped, watched the steppe newcomers arrive with horses and hymns and marry into the old village world, two strands braiding into classical India, the loud religion and the quiet one settling into a single household. And then we watched the strangest thing of all, the total forgetting. Script dead, bricks quarried, rivers moved, memory itself losing the greatest cities of the ancient world for 4,000 years, while the hands went on remembering everything that mattered, until the railway came, and the ballast crunched, and a seal with a bull and unread signs waited in plain sight for 50 years. And in 1924, a headline gave humanity back a third of its urban childhood, A century of trowels and satellites since has mapped 2,000 sites and opened barely a tenth of them. The answers to every question the night has honestly left open. The rulers, the language, the god of the bath, the meaning of the unicorn, lie, in all likelihood, still in the ground, under the mustard fields of Rakhigarhi and the drowned first city beneath Mohenjo-daro, waiting for a future fire. That is the story entire, the civilization that built the first planned cities and signed nothing, that kept the longest peace and left no boast of it, that vanished more completely than any great people ever vanished, and never, in the hands and mournings of 1 billion descendants, actually went away. And now the story is told, and there is nothing left to do and nothing left to solve. The questions can rest unanswered now. They have waited 4,000 years. They are good at waiting. Let them keep their watch, and let yourself be relieved of yours. Feel how quiet the plain has become. We are back where the night began, on the old mound above the river, under the enormous sky of Sind. But the dusk has deepened into full night now, and the world has gone soft and simple. The fields breathing out the day's warmth, the river murmuring somewhere in the dark, moving its silt as it has always moved it, patient beyond all patience, and above everything the stars. The same stars the city's astronomers sighted their streets by, the same stars the great bath doubled on still water, thick and slow and utterly unhurried. You may let your eyes rest now. Close them, if they wish to close. There is nothing to dig tonight, nothing to decipher, nothing to keep. The mound has held its secrets through 100,000 nights like this one. It will hold them for you until morning. Let your body grow heavy, the way the old cities grew heavy. Settling, layer upon layer, each day's small weight laid gently on the last, pressing everything slowly towards stillness. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands soften and open. Nothing in them, nothing needed in them. And let your breath find the oldest rhythm this land knows, in, like the flood arriving. Slow, generous, unforced, out, like the waters withdrawing, leaving everything fed. In and out. The river breathes this way. The monsoon breathes this way. One great breath a year. The civilization itself breathed this way. Rising, settling, rising, settling. And you may breathe with all of them for as long as you like. The images of the night can drift past now like lamplight down the lanes. You do not need to hold a single one. The straight streets in the evening gold, the water sliding clean down the sloped brick floors, the little clay goddess with her pinch of meal, the pull toy rattling ahead of the running dog, the honest stones, balanced, the unicorn, patient on its seal, keeping its meaning, the still pool on the citadel, doubling the stars, as the river doubles them now, somewhere below the mound, in the dark. Let each image come and glow and settle like silt into the riverbed, layer upon soft layer, going down easily, in good order, the way this civilization did everything. And if sleep is rising in you now, let it rise. It comes like the flood came to the old fields, not a danger, but a gift, arriving on its own calendar, covering everything gently, leaving everything richer. The people of these cities would tell you, if their words could reach us, and perhaps this is the one word that needs no deciphering, that rest is a kind of order too, that the day, like the city, is built in layers, and the last layer is always stillness, that nothing well made is lost by being set down. They set down a whole world, and it kept. You may set down this one night, and it will keep too. So rest now, traveller. The mound has carried 9 cities and 4,000 years. It can carry you until dawn. If, some other evening, you wish to walk through other ages and other streets, the fire will be lit and new journeys with it. And if tonight's journey brought you rest, you might, tomorrow, in the daylight, leave a word below to say where in the world you slept. But that is for tomorrow. Tonight there is only the plain and the river and the old, patient, unhurried stars. The east will take care of the dawn. It has never once forgotten. You have nothing to do but breathe and settle and let the layers take you. Sleep well, traveller. Good night.